on.
Oh, yeah. I know.
It didn't work, but everything worked.
Yeah, everything. We checked it yesterday. I meant to message you, and I guess I didn't. I don't know. I got
No, I
lost in
didn't
all of it.
expect you. I didn't even want to message to ask you to check.
No, no.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just got totally turned around, and then.
Nothing?
So if you need a call.
It's on.
I thought you may not have
And I can hear.
Yeah. Can I get your name?
I've got a name.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna go get my shirt on. No, I just want to wear my shirt.
Oh, your shirt.
That shirt. Laura said she was like, oh my God, I asked her. I said, oh, did you wear your shirt? Because they know shirt.
I know. I tried to make it comfortable. You can't, especially
No.
everyone looks different anyway.
Yeah. She was like, oh, my God. I was like,
It was classic though.
How much of
I
it
did it to, who did she do it to yesterday? Somebody else yesterday.
Oh,
she was
speaker.
like, yeah, and she was like, oh, I was trying to sign in and register them. I said, what's your name?
So you just, I'll send you the link, so you just check downstairs, because I'm
Sure.
just a bit worried that the sound's not coming through.
Alright, can you go and load it up quickly? Okay.
I'm going to sit at the end. It's easy for me to come out. Unless you're going to sit back down. Like, you're gonna sit at the end, yeah.
But black coffee.
So you said you don't like black coffee. Do you want to have a bit of this?
No, no, I was doing.
Just have a bit of this. I don't think you know. If you want, I'm going to sit there. And now I do.
It didn't work.
So you have,
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Let me just check my phone.
don't forget to advertise me.
These servers responded to the Sasha's phone.
I haven't done it.
I just have this feeling they won't go without explaining.
Oh, there's no service. I just realised.
Oh, is that what it is? What's that work? Does it work?
Setting. Yeah, no, see, there's always.
You've got the Wi-Fi on it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I spent ages yesterday until I realised that I had no connection.
So I would have been waiting here for like an hour. Why doesn't he text me back?
Do you
Yeah,
want
that's
a
exactly what I
chair?
did.
Or
Yes,
there's
please.
a higher one, I don't
The
know.
high ones would be much easier actually.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Do you know the Wi-Fi password? Is it just up to
Oh, no,
the-
here it is. It's MK Hospital Copy.
Yeah, there's a public connection.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Good. So easy.
Just look at the free ones.
Just turn the lights down a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm
because
going to
it
go and
shows.
sit this and that.
Yeah. So it's starting.
Screen looks better then.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
my video isn't quite so yellow.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Just in front of this then. Your hands are in longer. I can't see quite. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. When I said to my friend
Could I use the same link again? Can you send me? No, it's the same link, yeah. about it, and I think it's got you on it as well. I did press the mute button. So that would be annoying as well. So, unmute and... So unmute and private? Public? Yeah, yeah. Putting this up here so I
Can I just quickly check another presentation for the
sure.
next speaker?
Is it any one of those?
No, it's not been sent in yet.
Ah, alright. May I load it for you quickly then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it? Can she do? I think she's gonna try HDMI.
Or if you can, if you want to download it and have it, if that's easier.
Thank you.
HDMI, right?
Right, won't record. Alright, so then if you could download it, that would be great. Thank you.
Now we wait for the 20-minute opening of the computer.
Yeah, it's just working the audio as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I won't.
So I have it downloaded as both Keynote and PowerPoint.
PowerPoint, please. Thank you.
What's going on? Are you tired today? Are you ready for some fun?
You're always ready, so. You are tired.
Yeah. Yeah, I slept really well. I think I haven't slept in days. And last night I did everything, went to bed, and I was just out. And I woke up this morning and was like, where am I? What's the day? What am I doing? And then I realized, I was like, oh, God, I'm sleeping. I was like, oh my God. Yeah. Yeah.
Despite everything that's heard from the last half decade to not have the stress of the take like biological.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't feel like where I am, what I'm doing, I'm going to do the next day.
So would you like to email it to me?
Yeah, I can do that.
And that's how I sort of
Whenever you
tried
close these
the last 2
things
weeks, I could
down.
just focus on this and not get overwhelmed. And then, but I think what happens is when you have a big event, there are a lot of things you have to do at the last minute. Like you can't do them. You have to wait until the very end. And I just was like,
Alright, Lloyd, thank you.
yeah.
I'm going to have to if you have another.
See you later.
Yeah, but you haven't left it.
Yeah.
And keep your phone on, please.
Yeah.
How much was charged as well?
Yes. I think it works.
Okay, I'm going to need the internet.
Certainly. So if you MK public, that one done.
5 hours to do lanyards because the program I was using to print the badges, just like everything started going wrong, and then I was like, oh, and I ran out of paper, and I was like, no, I have to go back out to get paper. Yeah, and I was like, oh, everything's going wrong. Well, we said what we would do, I think, is do like a little behind the scenes of what we've done because, yeah. Yeah.
I suppose they're designed to go slower through time to
Everything is
go.
going
I
well.
need a
You
new
sort of
one.
focus
It's
on
like
it.
they sense when you actually need them to work quickly and like,
Yes, oh, got it. Email it, my darling.
And then it started to come up.
Basically, these aren't my reading glasses, so it's easy to do it.
Yeah.
there you go.
So I forwarded it to, I sent it to Jen as two attachments. So one is the PowerPoint, that one is.
Just waiting for it to come through.
Sorry. Oh yeah.
I love that you can touch big screens now.
When it works well, it works well.
He told you to put it anyways, didn't he? So you can just be wherever.
Yeah, I'd like to be one of those that takes the
Hit the screen, so that's good.
it's done.
think Joe's going to do introduction.
Right, so it is ready to go.
Fabulous. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Morning, everybody. Can you just put your hand up if you were here yesterday? Okay, so we've got a fairly even split. If you were here yesterday, most of what I'm about to say before I introduce our speaker, you've already heard, so you can just switch off for a second. Welcome back to the 2019 Breastfeeding Festival. Just a few housekeeping notices before I introduce David to you. So most obviously, if you could please switch your phones off or onto silent, that would be really helpful. It's quite distracting to hear them beeping, especially for our speakers. So that would be great. But we would love you to use social media and our hashtag BreastFestMK. Lots of people did that yesterday, especially on Twitter, and it was really, really helpful to us. So thank you if you were one of those people. Fire exits, so you've got doors on either side of this auditorium. Ideally, you'd take the stairs that you came up and not use the lifts. If there were to be a fire behind this wall, you can go across the mezzanine bridge and those doors will open on the other side, and there's another set of stairs there. All the doors down the side of the building would open automatically so you can get outside once they're out there. Hopefully that would be a thing to consider. Please be aware of the camera just on the stairs here. If you're sat on this side, you need to come out to go to the loo, or when the talk finishes, just be mindful of that. And also, if you've got children, a bit of a trip hazard, so just be careful. Toilets and nappy change. There are toilets directly outside here and also at the bottom of the stairs. There's an accessible toilet downstairs too, and that's got a nappy change point in it if you wanted to use the toilets for that. You are free to change nappies wherever. We would just ask that you use the bins that aren't in the atrium just because there's food around. So bins in the retreats where there's changing points, or in the loos and things. And just on the subject of rubbish, we did have quite a lot left in here yesterday, mostly recycling, paper left over from forks and things. But if you could just take that with you, because it took us a while to go up and down each row, any bits and bobs, even if you don't want them, there's recycling downstairs, so if you could take it, that would be really helpful. Committee members are all wearing these black lanyards and also our volunteers, so anybody needs anything, first aid, directions, if something gets broken or spilled, please come and let us know, or just come and say hi. Parking, obviously we're parked, but payment for parking, people kept asking yesterday, that's right at the front of the multi-storey car park facing the hospital itself. And you should be able to get into the 8-hour £5.30 charge. Otherwise it dumps up to £10, which I got stung for yesterday, obviously. So yeah, just validate your ticket before you go back to your car. Raffle downstairs was really popular yesterday, so thank you. If you haven't bought any tickets yet, it's just at the bottom of here if you come through the door after this talk. It's by the reception desk, and we're drawing that today at 3:15. If you have left by then, we can post or deliver your prizes to you, so don't let that put you off. If anyone today is wearing a lanyard with a yellow piece of paper in it, that means they don't want their photo on social media. So if you are snapping away and adding photos to social media, you're fine. Please just be mindful of those people. And also, this is a little bit awkward, Lindsay Hookway, who's one of our speakers later today, had a stack on her table downstairs of 5 books called Holistic Sleep. And at some point between her leaving yesterday and arriving this morning, they've all gone. But it might have looked a little bit like they were free because they were just piled up on the table without any prices or anything listed. So if you have picked one of those up, it's not a problem at all, but if you could just drop them back to her, or just let us know if you took it home last night, just say that you've got one, so that we can just sort that out, because 5 books is quite a few, so that would be great if you could. Lastly, I think, oh no, 2 more things, sorry. Okay, so children, obviously very welcoming of children, and there were loads of children here yesterday, and there's lots of activities for them throughout the day, and it was really lovely. It was a lovely atmosphere. If you do need to entertain them while you're in here, there's some play mats and books and toys and things, so you can come down to the front. Speakers don't mind if you're sat down here at all, but it might be a way just of keeping you in here, rather than you having to go out with them. There is, however, underneath here a room with soft play, and then there's a retreat room, nice and quiet, and a children's activity room, so there are lots of options for them. The one underneath here with the soft play in it has got a live feed from this room, so you'll still be able to hear the talks and see the slides, and lots of people used that yesterday, which I think was quite helpful for them, because they didn't miss out on the talks that they wanted to see. And this is my last point. Later today we've got Louise Oliver from Diversity in Infant Feeding coming to speak to you. She'll be downstairs from about 10 o'clock, and she's working with a photographer. You might have seen our posts about this on social media. So she's looking to ensure that every breastfeeding person is represented across all platforms, media, in society generally. So I find myself constantly represented because of how I look, my age, my size, but many people don't, and that's something that we and she want to address. So if you've already signed up to have your photo taken with her today, just go and make yourself known to her after this talk. If you haven't signed up with her already and you think, I want to see myself represented more, please go and make yourself known to her, because she has still got spaces throughout the day to take more photographs, and that's something that we're really championing because it's such an important initiative. After her talk, so you might watch her talk and think, actually I really want to do this. The photographer only has 1 hour after her talk, so she's not going to be able to fit tons and tons of people in. So the sooner the better with that, please. And yeah, if you are one of those people, that would be awesome. We would love to build her bank of images up as much as possible, starting with this festival. That is it for housekeeping. So, I can now introduce our first speaker for today, Zainab Yates, who has a background in medical ethics and law. She's a breastfeeding supporter and also runs a website which I follow quite a lot at the moment, which is breastfeedingaversion.com. And it's centred around her research on breastfeeding aversion and agitation and the physical and emotional feelings that come with experiencing aversion and agitation. So over to you, Zainab.
Just need to get a clicker. Hello everyone. I'm not going to pace because I was just getting away and I think it's being filmed, so but I might sit down and get up, sit down and get up. So I'd like to start with this picture because although it's a bit oh yeah, sure. Although it's not really what we see as a portrait of motherhood generally, a lot of women who are breastfeeding and struggling with aversion. Do I just stick it on?
In your pocket, in your pocket.
Oh, okay.
And then there you go. Hope you
Can I talk loud? Or not really?
should be okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
They feel like this. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's
That's not too loud. Okay. Inside, they feel this kind of image portrayed inside. So, I'm going to just describe a little bit about what aversion is, because some people might be familiar with it, others may not. And I've found some words to help describe it a bit more succinctly. And I think it's important everybody has the words to describe it. And then I just wanted to talk about a little bit about what mothers themselves say, because it's really important having that narrative as well, because it's often not voiced, because it's very difficult actually sometimes to come to terms with these feelings, and then how to lessen it. And again, I want to be really clear that there is, aside from my research article and 2 other articles, and soon to be a chapter in Hilary Flower's new edition of her tandem feeding book, nothing on aversion. So I am not talking from a clinical background, and there is no interventions that are researched. There's no clinical trials, nothing like that. However, there's enough out there to indicate some things can help. I wanted to make that clear. So the outline is just a little bit about what I do after mothers' own words about their experience of aversion, just so you can get the general idea what aversion is, and then what we found from the structured support, and a little bit about how to kind of navigate through it. So last year I spoke, or the year before maybe, I don't know, I spoke at the Breastfeeding and Feminism Conference in North Carolina, which was an amazing conference. And I got to hear Penny Van Estrick, who wrote a book called The Dance of Nurture. And she conceptualized motherhood, stroke breastfeeding, as nurture. And what that essentially meant is that she tried to move away from the mechanics of how we've been taught, you know, timing feeds, supply and demand, things that are words used from the industrial era, things like that, into understanding it as nurture, movement, rhythms, dance, partners, love, that kind of stuff, which isn't often spoken about. And it was really enlightening, but it made me wonder, what if some of us can't dance? Are there factors that come into it? And of course in the book she says there are, and I think aversion is one of them. So this lady is now an IBCLC because of her struggle with aversion, and she wrote to me a few years ago, and she Said, I thought my breastfeeding problems were now far behind me. Imagine the chaos in my head when breastfeeding suddenly turns into an unbearable, invasive experience. This is a very active lady on social media, Mama Lubons, and she put nursing had become overwhelmingly soul-destroying at around 10 months old. The feelings I had when she was latched were so intense, I was over it. It was all-consuming, rage, anger, frustration and sadness. This is how nursing aversion made me feel. And then this. At 12:41 a.m. this morning, I felt agitated, angry, used, violated and exhausted. So social media is amazing because you can read these things, which often you can go through your whole pregnancy and breastfeeding experience for years and never once even think that someone else experiences this. That's boring. You can find out about what I do. So I just do polls, and I like to show this one because of the percentage of people that don't actually know it's a thing, and that don't tell anyone about it. And it's just too much as a percentage, I think, because secrecy never makes anything better. But for things that we feel shameful about, we keep secret. But it becomes more of a burden, and I believe it can compound and make your problems worse, in a sense. Because we know talking helps. That's what counselling-based therapies, talking-based therapies are based on, talking, and they help for lots of reasons. So nursing aversion, it exists if you know what it's called, and it's really great that the Lecture League and other breastfeeding institutes will openly post about these things. Yeah, that's boring. Sorry, I'm so over me now, I'm just so bored. This is important. I was a breastfeeding peer supporter for many years because of my experience with aversion, but I didn't know I had aversion, and I didn't know how to tell anyone. And in Harrow, we have like a really, a really amazing setup. We've got big groups of peer supporters. We have good involvement with UNICEF. We just got reaccredited, and they often come and ask for help, which is basically pictures and interviews for literature and resources on UNICEF's site. And on the top right, they've used that on their website. I have another one on the UNICEF Baby Friendly where I'm smiling and breastfeeding. And it's really funny because I can tell you that I had extreme aversion. I can't even tell you how bad it was. But there's me smiling. I post it on social media just to show you that what the images show aren't necessarily the reality. And because of that, and the overwhelming images, and we're talking about representation here of diverse groups, representation of unhappy mothers is not there. Or perhaps not unhappy mothers, but negative feelings, or the reality of how it can be when you're by yourself and struggling. So it made me wonder, all these images of smiling women, which are the kind of archetypal breastfeeding image because of the oxytocin and what we know about it. But for women with aversion, and other women, I won't go into the biology in detail, but to do with perhaps a lower amount of oxytocin in your blood, or a negative association that you'll have with oxytocin, which can occur, we know, in the condition dysphoric milk ejection reflex. Breastfeeding might be more like this, and constantly like this, And that doesn't mean that it's not a good breastfeeding relationship per se, it just might be your one. That's boring. If you want any references or anything, I can give you them and a breakdown of them and the pros and cons, just get in touch. But that's to date. I need to add Hilary Flowers and 2 more hopefully this year coming out, which is great. The more it's published, the more we know. Because your heart breaks, So the study's really interesting and blah, blah, blah. But the most important thing is the words that women used and how I put them into themes. And essentially, I described the phenomena using the women's own words. So breastfeeding aversion and agitation is when breastfeeding is a phenomenon naturally occurring that triggers negative emotions when the woman has the baby or toddler attached. So it's when breastfeeding triggers negative emotions when the child is latched. And it appears to happen at any point in a breastfeeding journey, and the onset varies. We're not sure why, strictly speaking, although I can tell some patterns. And the duration and severity differ based on the cause. So they all vary, but within the dyad, the mother and baby, there's very specific reasons why they happen, why they stop, why it continues, and sometimes it doesn't go away. And I want to be really clear about that and champion that for some women who continue to breastfeed through aversion, you know, sometimes for years. So these were the categories, the description of it, which I've told you the main important bit. And then the severity can range from mild to severe, and there's different nuances between that, and you'll know where you sit on that spectrum and when you sit on that spectrum. So severe can mean that you delatch, and severe can mean that you delatch and leave the room. And severe can mean that you don't, but inside every part of you wants to, and you self-harm to stay breastfeeding. A lot of women I would categorise as self-harming, where they'll hold on to another part of their body so strongly to create a sensation elsewhere in order to continue the feed, and it can draw blood, actually. Funny enough, biting down on your hand, holding onto your thigh. It's a very funny trick, which you'd think is a bit of a faux pas, is when you hold the breast very strongly and you distort the shape, actually. But plenty of women, and I was doing it intuitively, but I never told anyone because you worry about blocked ducts and the transfer of milk, so I would never advise that to anyone, but it seems a lot of women do it. So these are the kind of descriptions you get: anger, agitation, rage, irritability, skin itching, little bugs under your skin, and then the urge to delatch, and some waves of guilt and shame that come in between. And a large proportion of women who experience aversion want to continue breastfeeding, and want to is separate to also continuing. Some women don't want to but continue for other reasons, like the nursling is not ready to wean, or they know too much about breast milk and its importance that they want to carry on, so they'll kind of do it. So there are particular times it happens. Ovulation's a key one. Return of the postnatal menses is another. Nighttime is a big key indicator. Tandem nursing is another one. And when very sleep deprived. Although saying that, it can happen just once, and some women don't know why it happens. So be on the lookout. No, I'm joking. Some feeds, every feed. So it varies along its spectrum a lot. We've done that. I don't like graphs. I just wanted to draw a distinction between what it is and what it's not. I've had plenty of conversations where I've been going on and on about it, and someone thought I was talking about when the baby is refusing the breast, you know, breast refusal, breastfeeding aversion. And I'm not talking about that. It's not purely a mother's experience, but it's certainly mostly a mother's experience. It's not aversion in the sense that they're just averse to trying breastfeeding or breastfeeding in general, which it's often confused for. It can spill over into other parts of your life, but it's very intense and it's centred around when they're latched. So it's very odd to explain, but once they're delatched, it just suddenly disappears. Literally, it would just go. The insanity, in a way, it just goes, which is in distinction to dysphoric milk ejection reflex, which can just disappear after about 10 minutes, roundabout, and comes with the letdown. So the timings of when it occurs are different. So it doesn't matter if you've got like a 3-hour boob to bedtime feed. You'll have aversion for 3 hours. You can have it for the whole lot whenever they're latched. Do you see what I mean? Whereas dysphoric milk ejection reflex is in kind of like waves and troughs with the letdown, depending on how long you can last the feed. They're also very different emotions. There can be a lot of overlap, but things like hopelessness, homesickness, despair, the bottomless pit of your tummy, that kind of stuff, is not really anger and rage. It's just not. Although saying that, struggling with dysphoric milk ejection reflex, I think, makes you a little bit more at risk of having aversion because of the negative association to breastfeeding. again, no data. But I have reasonable cause to say that statement. I don't know how to say it. It's boring. That's rather boring. The structure support course is really interesting because women voluntarily can just sign up to give anonymous data, and it's really helped me to figure out what kind of things can be intertwined with aversion, and things like struggling through persistent pain, often citing things like tongue ties, which, you know, the jury's out for some people, for other people it's not. But as mothers, we don't specifically know, unless we've been assessed, and our nursling's been assessed, about restrictive ties. But it's very commonly brought up in the groups. So it's something that seems to affect the sensation and the length of the feeds and the challenges at the beginning of the breastfeeding journey. And all of these things, I think, tie in. Here, another poll is about weaning. Again, you can see the majority are actually not weaning, not actively weaning. And from the structured support course, I've kind of put these kind of steps. So we're talking sometimes only a minute here in reality, but you've got the mother who wants to breastfeed. I characterise that as a kind of intention, because if she didn't, she'd stop. So that intention is important there to understand the mother's role and intention in what she's doing. She wants to breastfeed, so she will responsively breastfeed when being asked. Then comes the activity of breastfeeding, and the aversion will just kick in where the arrow is as soon as the baby's latched. However, there's a knock-on effect until the cycle starts again. So if, for example, you're ovulating 2 weeks before your menses, you might have this cycle happen continuously during the day for that day or the 2 days or so, where you've got so when you ovulate, some women have a larger spike in testosterone, which we didn't learn in Biology 101, which I feel ashamed to say that I didn't know about until recently. And testosterone is a direct antagonist to oxytocin, and it's also, as we know, attributed to the male kind of tendencies of aggression and being on heat a little bit. So that kind of stuff is often not seen as what oxytocin does for when you're breastfeeding. So when you feel a little bit tetchy, or you don't want them on you, that could be very easily attributed to the testosterone peak at that time. But what happens is that this cycle can continue, and it gets very emotionally burdensome, because you just think, why is this such a big deal? But actually, it can be very, very difficult. Another thing from the structured support course is that there were a lot of women that said that they had breastfeeding difficulties. So they can class that in any way that they want. One woman's difficulty is not another woman's difficulty. But for me, the key is that they found it challenging. And again, I would posit that perhaps the challenge may have caused a negative association with breastfeeding that has continued on or resurfaced when there's a change in development in the babies, like a sleep regression where you're breastfeeding more, like teething where you're breastfeeding more, like illness where you're breastfeeding more. Notice all of these things where you're breastfeeding more. When it's more intense, it can take you back to that day, those days where you were just, at the brink of it, trying to establish your supply, which I hold is no mean feat. Trying to establish your supply in itself, I think, is challenging. I know it's kind of washed over, but I mean, it's such a big deal to get that responsiveness 24 hours a day. And in addition to that, many of these women are not just breastfeeding, they're combi feeding or they're whatever it's called, you're kind of topping up, pumping and breastfeeding, doing that drama. So, I mean, it's just good to have it out there. I'm not saying we've made a big change in any way, but reading the same words that you could have written yourself, it makes a big difference. In fact, it can sometimes just take the weight off in itself. You've just read the same horrific thought that somebody else has had exactly as you had it last night. It's a big deal. But the questions are also important. Does it go away? Why is it happening? what's wrong with me? And mainly for the older children, how do I gently night wean? If we have a boob monster that's massively attached, it can be a big deal if your aversion is very bad at night. And I think for some women in some groups, dyads, that aversion can be an indicator to start that conversation with your nursling, because your body's kind of telling you, okay, you know, they need it, but they're not going to die if they don't have it, not like when they're a newborn. So you can be responsive but not breastfeed anymore, and it's not going to harm them. But it's a difficult change it's going to be a difficult change for anyone that's breastfeeding to make any changes to the breastfeeding relationship if it's working properly, because oxytocin creates such a strong bond that, you know, unless you're kind of, I don't know, super skilled in how to manage your nursling's reactions, responses, emotions and connection, then making a change will be difficult. Not only for the nursling, very difficult for the nursling sometimes, but also very difficult for you, because you've got the habitual pattern that's been created with the pathways that oxytocin makes very strong. So, you know, you could call it Stockholm syndrome, because you're kind of held captive by the baby, and you fall in love with your captor. You know, you keep going back for more. And for many years, the biggest unknown question for me was, why did I carry on? Why do women who have severe aversion particularly carry on? But I think the answer lies in, at least partly, in this relationship, because oxytocin is known to create bonds for life. Anyway, social media is great. The resource website, I'm going to change that because I think I know a lot more now, but I'm just getting around to it. But still, it's got information for partners, information in French, in Czech, in, I think, Russia, I can't remember, and some videos. Videos are often a good way to just, it's a 3-minute thing to open the conversation, because sometimes it's just not nice to have it, especially when your husband doesn't believe you or your healthcare professional thinks you must be postnatally depressed, because it's negative thoughts and negative emotions. Intrusive thoughts and negative emotions, if you're a woman who's had a baby, normally equals postnatal depression. Without a more in-depth assessment, that's what women get frustrated with, because they're just kind of labelled with that. And often they're like, no, I'm actually okay, my life is okay. But at the point of breastfeeding, I want to just shove them off and run away, I'm furious, and that kind of thing. So it's got a little bit of that you can have a look at. And then social media is good where they've got the right hashtags. You can have a look at posts where you have more realistic kind of like grumbles about what it's like. I did a series about what not to say to women with aversion. I might run it again, but it's the same with breastfeeding as well. You know, give them a bottle, just stop then. Like, it's so easy just to stop, like it's only you in the conversation, or I mean, it's just not easy to stop being. You're kind of a little bit like a prisoner at night, because you have to get them to sleep. If they're exclusively breastfed, it's their way to get to sleep. How are you going to do it otherwise? Some people don't know. Unless you've gone through it, you really don't know how difficult it can be. And more often than not, it's just the easiest way, even if you've got aversion, to get a baby or a toddler to sleep. So you'll end up going back. So just saying, oh, you know, bottle and weaning, it's not really the answer. And it's important for, I suppose, us to know that. Because when people tell us that, then we try and implement it, and it doesn't work, then you realise you're just making the situation worse, hoping to do better and thinking that it should work because everyone's telling you that. It's just, I want to normalise a bit of the reality of it and the day-to-day experience of it, or the night-to-night experience of it. So the first thing you do, so I'm going to do a kind of flow chart, I think an interactive flow chart, because it gets quite confusing, but the group helps. So we've got peer-to-peer support in the group. Hopefully people will sign up for the mentorship program, so if they've been through it, they can help you navigate a bit, because when you're first struck with it, you just, you know, think that either you're crazy or, I suppose, if you don't know about it, you also think it's a bit abnormal. And I'd like to say that I don't think it's abnormal to get aversion. I don't think it's an aberration from the norm. I just think that we live in the 21st century, and motherhood has been put on this placard above everything else, which has happened in previous centuries that we've not known about. This kind of eternal motherly love came about around the start of the 18th century, where before that they would just fob off the most intensive times of child rearing, i.e. breastfeeding, and the toddler years, to another party, whether it was a nanny or a wet nurse or boarding schools, or it wasn't as intensive as it is now, because we know so much, and because the role of mothers is now also to nurture, to be the emotional manager, to raise good citizens of society. But if we were in the 17th century, we would not have those pressures. We would have other pressures, sure. We would have the difficulty of finding food, making food, things like that. But the burden we put on ourselves to win it all and be responsible for all of our children not being mass murderers, it sounds absurd, but what's it called? I don't agree with a lot of it, but the cult of motherhood, if you just read a couple of articles about that, really puts things into perspective, really frees you from the notion that everything's on you. If you read Jacqueline Rose, Mothers on Love and Cruelty, it's an essay. I don't know why she called it an essay, it's a book, but it's called an essay, Mothers on Love and Cruelty. She talks about how society at once pins everything on mothers with the expectation for them to do everything, and yet blames them at the same time when they don't do what they're supposed to do. And in addition to that, the policies in the government don't ensure the possibility of success. So if, for example, breastfeeding is the best for your child, responsive parenting is the best for your child, connective nurture is the best for your child, which we could say we think is all true. There's a lot of research now about neural connections, development, the importance of a well-grounded adult having secure connection as a child. If that's all true, and we agree with it, and society agrees with it, and the government upholds it, then why in America do mothers have to go back at 6 weeks? I mean, it's just ridiculous. You cannot win. And I think that situation of not being able to win happens a lot on a day-to-day basis for many of us. We're juggling many different things. And breastfeeding is no different to one of those things that it gets impacted. Our lives get impacted. Breastfeeding is one of those things I think the spillover impacts as well. So first thing is to just know it's there. Second thing is to identify your triggers. You can have very odd triggers if you don't know a little bit more about it. So for example, survivors of abuse. If we talk about it openly, if you realise the memories it can bring, if you realise the difficulty with body autonomy that they may have, and the difficulty with assault and abuse that they've experienced, these women can have that triggered with the body contact. You can't breastfeed without your breast being touched, without your nipples being stimulated in many respects. So it may seem obvious when someone points it out, but when you're going through it, you don't pick it up. And I don't know if that's because this side of the brain is a little bit kind of turned off when we're mothers. Is it the logical side? Am I making it up? Our logic kind of just goes out the window because we're supposed to be nurturing. So why do we need ration and logic? We don't. We need love and connection. So for myself, I can speak from experience. I mean, I figured out why I got aversion. It took me 4.5 years. And 3.5 of those were literally researching it on an academic basis, having conversations with my husband, with another professor. And, now I look back at it, I just think, dang, aren't you an idiot? Obviously it was that. I fed through restrictive ties. One was diagnosed, one was not diagnosed. I have extremely sensitive nipples, yet to find out exactly why. I was a bit tetchy before I got pregnant, but afterwards, brush a towel over them, anything over them, I will want to stab you. I'm not joking, I get the instant kind of shudder. In fact, looking at pictures when I had aversion of the nipple twiddling that can happen, if none of you know what that is, you're extremely lucky. If you do know what that is, and you've managed to stop it, you're extremely lucky. If you're going through it and you're able to cope, I'd say you're extremely lucky as well. It's basically this. I can do it now. Sorry, I should have done a trigger. Okay, I can see shudders. I'm sorry, I should have done a trigger warning. Which, it's wonderful. It stimulates the letdown. All this drama. I don't give an F what it does. If you can't bear it, stop it, and stop it quickly, because it might be the difference between you carrying on and you stopping your breastfeeding journey in that session or repeatedly. And, these are not sexual organs primarily, but they're still involved in sex. and they're sensitive, and they can cause orgasms, and they can be part of that experience, and that crossover is uncomfortable for some women as well. So it needs to be spoken about. Even stroking, to be honest, some people. That's the nipple twiddling. I'm not going to put that as a boob rolling on the floor. So hand holding, I'd say, like Lindsay's going to talk about it later a lot. She talks about giving you tools to implement straight away. So they're not interventions, they're not things that are going to harm anyone, especially, but they're tools to allow the behaviours between you and your nursling or nurslings to blossom to an extent which will empower you when you need to make sleep changes and sleep interventions to do them. And it's the same here. Start hand-holding early on. Start singing a song and ending the breastfeeding journey early on. Start patting early on. Start having boundaries early on. Within reason, you know, we know that we'll go the extra mile if they're in pain, if they're ill, if they're not eating, they only have the milk. We're going to be giving them milk 24 hours in that day. But as it goes on, be empowered to know yourself, know your child, and set those limitations in the sense of your own personal preference. And it varies for everyone. Some people can sleep with someone attached to their breast. Superwomen. I can't sleep with my husband's finger on my shoulder. I need him off me. I need to be away from him. And, you know, he can sleep. You know, I walked in this morning, I'm not lying. My daughter was, because I had a difficult time with motherhood, I won't lie. To the extent that he had to step in. And he really had to do everything because I couldn't cope. It was very difficult for me. And part of that was the sleep. I walk in this morning, he does the nights, sleeping with my daughter and my son because I can't sleep with them because I don't get sleep. I sleep on my own. And yes, we do have sex, you know. It's not, you don't have to be in the same room at night. But she's lying, she's 3.5, nearly 4. She's lying with her face on the side of his face and her whole body, heavy as it is, on his body, and he is asleep. You laugh because you know it's insane. It's like, what is wrong with you? Me, I'd be just wide awake. You don't want to move because you know the day is going to be a drama if she doesn't sleep. And it's the same for all the contact naps, for the breastfeeding to sleep. You know, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And if your personal preference or your need is not compatible with your nurslings, you're going to have some kind of friction. You're going to have to work through it. And as they're young and it's intensive, you're going to have to give more because that's just what happens, unless you can't, in which case you're going to stop. And there's other things that come with that. And as they grow older, because you've been giving more, you're in that kind of limbo where you just keep giving and giving and giving, and that's the dynamic. It's really cruel, actually, because then you have to get out of it. I keep going off on one. So identify what it is. Initially, everyone does it, but maybe not to the degree that they could. You have to distract yourself to the point that when you come off your distraction device, you know, the aversion is all of a sudden overwhelming you. So you can do it in different ways. I'll wait till baby goes. There's a lovely lady who's doing a PhD looking at aversion and naturopathic remedies and support. And many years ago, she noticed that some supplements can help. Magnesium is one of them, with the proviso that you're taking it responsibly, it's not in contradiction to anything else, and that you aren't struggling necessarily with other causes. And by causes, I mean magnesium may help with things like oxytocin, may help with things like your pathways in the body. It's known to be needed for energy consumption, which would make sense because you're lactating and you're consuming more energy than it is to do a run, okay? A 20-minute run, you're consuming more energy to make milk than that. Your heart consumes less energy than it does to lactate. So you're consuming a lot of energy. However, if you've got persistent pain, if you're pregnant and tandem feeding or pregnant and breastfeeding and your nipples are sore and there's this kind of terrible flutter sucking that can happen, you know, magnesium's not going to help with that because it's extremely irritating to have that grating sensation, and the magnesium's not going to help. Saying that, however, there's been a lot of, you know, it's taken my aversion completely away type of comment, which is amazing, and there's a lot of hope for the future. And then peer-to-peer support just to get through the worst of it. If it's, for example, 3 days of ovulation, that could be 3 years of hell for you. That could seem like that, just to get through the worst of it. You need to be able to say things, kind of horrific things, maybe, without being judged, without having someone call child protection on you, that type of thing. That can help to get through the worst of it. And also to seek advice and tips from other women, because it's very nuanced. And then partner, another adult, supportive, trusted caregiver, an adult. It can just do wonders. Because what can happen with aversion is that the negativity can spill over to your nursling because of the social nervous system. You might be able to hide your negative emotions, but you won't be able to hide the fact your body's tense. You might not be able to notice that you're not smiling, you're not being responsive because you're trying to bottle down the craziness that's just risen. But that affects our little ones straight away because they have a social nervous system that's more attuned even than ours potentially. So they'll be able to notice it, and unfortunately it will mean that they might feel a little unnerved and then want to come back to breastfeed. So you get a kind of vicious cycle. So you'll get aversion, you'll get the social nervous system going offline, you'll get them feeling that it's offline and then wanting to come back to you, place of safety, to get it back online with the kind of touch, the smile, the closeness. But unfortunately, if you're experiencing aversion in that moment, that just makes it worse. And setting limits I've spoken about. So often it's multiple things at a particular time for some women, and it's just about identifying those. So is it track your periods, track the days it starts, not only your period when it starts, but your emotions on 3 days before, 4 days before. I was just talking to my friend in the car. There's very specific characteristics to your periods and your emotions when you're menstruating. Postmenstrual tension, that in itself can make nursing very difficult because you're tense. You have difficulty regulating. You struggle with a lot of things when there's hormonal changes in your body. It's not only just hormonal. I mean, I have to change my size of clothing and my bra on that time. You change your, what's this area? Your womb? No. It expands. What expands? It expands about 25% or 80%. It's an organ. I think it's your womb when you're menstruating. So it changes and it grows, which means you've got a bodily change, quite a drastic one if you think about it, happening at the time. So it would make sense that you might find breastfeeding a bit more difficult, especially if they're kind of kicking you or lunging at you or stabbing you a little bit or lying on you, or just if you're bleeding, you maybe feel uncomfortable and you want to get up and go and change, but you're stuck and you can't. You can get very agitated. And then particular things like stroking, pinching, nipple twiddling, some may bother one person, not another. Knowing exactly what bothers you and when can really empower you to make subtle changes. They don't have to be big changes, but they can knock it on the head a little bit. I spoke about cognitive distraction, but I think it always helps understanding the mechanisms and why it helps, and why cognitive distraction is so effective is because your brain can only focus on one mental activity at a time. And apparently, processing emotions and the environment is a very intensive mental activity. So if you're doing something else, you won't get overwhelmed by the negative emotions. I mean, to the extent that you may not react as badly as you think you would. And the caution here is just too much blue light at night. So I would advise to look into more innovative ways of being distracted, whether it's kind of headphones and a visual, but with a dark screen. This thing, which saved me a number of times, a stress ball, which I used to play games with. Doesn't make sense, but it was a cognitive distraction for me that kept me away from delatching before they were ready to stop. So it basically stopped a lot of my problems, because if you persistently prematurely delatch, you create this kind of tension with your nursing. It's all about the social nervous system as well. And, not being funny, but often it's the only thing they've known. And you're just kind of just whipping it away from them sometimes and not other times. The mixed message can cause a lot of confusion in them, especially when they, in a way, feel like it's their right. It's my right, it's my boob, and it's my milk. And it's not for them to understand in a way that it's our body, because I think it's up until 2 they don't really understand that we're separate to them. That in some ways it's not possible for them to understand that we feel like we have some autonomy over our bodies. Like I spoke earlier about this, this is the... this lady posted in the group a few years ago, and there's been a few since, where women will do this instinctively. I suspect with older nurslings it's all right, and dependent on whether you're prone to having blocked ducts or mastitis, or where they are. I never had mastitis, and I never had blocked ducts. I never had milk plebs. I did this almost every feed from about 3 months. I mean, to the extent that where you could see there was fingerprint marks, you could see red marks, because I couldn't bear a feed unless I was intensely squeezing my breasts when they were latched. And I think it's because of the nipple contact with the top of the palate, or whatever it was. It made me breastfeed for almost 4 years with 2 of them. And you'll see in any pictures that I have, rare and few and far between, that I'm doing that in all of them. And I didn't know I was doing it. What I did know was that it was not right, because I was a peer supporter, and that's just not what we do. However, if it works and you're not getting any negative consequences, and your nursling's older, and you're doing it all intuitively, then lo and behold, do it. These are some boundaries. I can send these to you. I'm not saying they don't work. I'm saying I generally work with women when these don't work. So if it was as easy as setting boundaries and having milk only in a chair and stuff like that, I wouldn't be having this conversation. But there are definitely things to try. One thing I would say, if you're going to try any of these things with your breastfeeding relationship, consistency is key. And also, obviously, if they're a newborn or under 6 months, and also maybe even under a year, where nutrition is the first milk is the first and only important nutrition under 1 year. Perhaps not limit it then if you can cope, or seek medical and specialist lactation advice. I'm going to be honest. I had an extremely difficult time at night. I'm not going to cry. It's fine. So at 3 months, it started with my first. It was very early on. But with my second, I thought I hadn't gotten it at night. But at 9.5 months, it just came like a sledgehammer. And, I think I lasted about a month before I was really concerned. And I had to get the help of an IBCLC and an infant feeding specialist and my supervisor to wean her at night, which is horrible. But actually, she was okay. He wouldn't have been okay, funnily enough, but she was very accommodating, even at 9.5 months, by the 10.5 months. It sounds odd to say, but I honestly believe she understood. I used to speak to her a lot about it. I even told her when I was giving birth to her that you're a bit stuck, they're telling you you're not coming out, you need to turn in the womb. I love when they poop. He just did a big poop. And now he's not making any noise, Can't remember what I was saying. Oh yeah, I told her, you need to turn, I need your help. I can't make you turn, and apparently you're supposed to turn. I didn't realise that they have to turn when they go down the... Yeah, and she did. It was about 30 seconds later, and honest to God, she moved. And I knew from that point on, I could just tell her. And I used to tell her about my aversion. I think in the beginning she didn't really care, but about 9.5 months, she was much more responsive to not having the breast asleep. But that was very intensive with my husband, with the slinging, with looking at nutrition, so it's possible. But I had help and support, and I knew what needed to be done without it getting worse. But I just wanted to make the point, because I talk about aversion across the spectrum of women, but across the spectrum of nurslings. So I'm talking from newborn down to 7 years old. It's many, many years, and every single month of that first year is a different story of what the nursling needs. And then in the second year, maybe it goes down every 2 months or so, but they change very dramatically. So I can't give a blanket statement about what to do at each age. That's what I mean to say. I want to be very careful about what I say. So we've done that. I always want to dedicate a little bit to when it doesn't work, nothing works. I think maybe with a bias, because I wasn't able to do anything except to wean. But I think if I'm honest, I was weaning for about a year, so I was so done they were not. And then I think maybe because of the oxytocin, I was so done, but not at all. Does that make sense? It's a very bizarre situation to be in. So you're all nodding your head because you know exactly what I mean. And if you try and talk to a male about it, who has a particularly rational, logical side of the brain, which they tend to often, they won't understand what that exactly means because you're not making sense. It's not rational to both want something and not want something at the same time. And I don't know, reason is only one way of thinking. You know, it's predominant in our academic culture and in our schooling and in our society, but it really is only one way of thinking. There are other ways of thinking, like intuition, love, experiential. You don't have to be reason-based. On that level, it makes complete sense. So if it does, you can be weaning for a long time. I would call that weaning. I think breastfeeding support is weaning support. Because you need breastfeeding support while you're weaning for that month, year. So emotions themselves, I'm writing a book, and the beginning of the book, it talks about a lot about what normal emotions are. I don't think these are abnormal emotions. I think we can have positive and negative emotions in the same experience at different times, and that's the same in life. But because I suppose the predominant breastfeeding literature has been smiling women and the overemphasis on loving it and loving motherhood and being a great mum and having the oxytocin and blah, 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 we do have a kind of amazing, so that if we're not enjoying it, or that if we're getting severe negative emotions, that something's actually abnormal. But I think in every case, sometimes after months of working, I don't know where I last told this, but there was a lady, she was about 18 months on and off. She was messaging me privately. Very proud lady, very sensitive, very driven, great achiever, had 2 children. She'd struggled with aversion for that 18. Very intensive conversations because she'd tell me everything and I'd just say, can I ask this, can I ask that? And it was like the 18th month or something, dropped in that she'd had her thesis due. You're writing a PhD thesis and you didn't think that that would affect your breastfeeding. Like, how did you not think that this would affect how you were feeling at 3 hours boobing at night? Like when you have a paper to submit for the next day. But it didn't come up. This is over a year we were talking. And, you know, you have to consider the whole picture about what's going on in your life. External stresses that you don't even think that are bothering you can come out in your breastfeeding. And I'll tell you why. Because it's not a kinetic activity. You cannot move mostly. You know, as they get older, it becomes much less kinetic. But certainly putting them to sleep, everything like that, you're not moving. And if you're not moving and it's nighttime and you're in a dark room, you know, if you're not distracting yourself very well, the pressure of that situation can bring out the demons. You know, you've got all the things you need to do, whether it's from submitting a PhD thesis. People get extremely upset when there's a massive pile in there. You know, it can make your day or not. So you need to work a little bit, not only on the emotions and accepting them, but I suppose, how would you call it? Professionally, they'd call it psychoanalytical kind of what's going on. But even with talking it out with some people, you'll be able to get some basic understandings about it. You'll be going away. And then the shame and the guilt is something that can be as heavy as the... So once you the possible triggers in your life, as well as the emotional and the negative emotions that are abnormal, considered abnormal and wrong, if you couple those two together, you can start to address your guilt and shame and what I would call often not true guilt, and it starts to lessen the difficulty. Much like, for example, we know that depression can make you feel more pain. Why is that? Because pain is supposedly biological, right? And we know that addressing your mental state can reduce your pain. So it's something to think about if you've got what seems like quite a physical phenomena manifesting, to address these other areas, to maybe lessen the severity of it or the frequency of it occurring. Again, that's with the proviso that, for example, you're not feeding through persistent pain, because pain management, pain control, pain acceptance therapy, things like that can actually help you cope with the pain in that moment. But, you know, you have to be some kind of Mother Teresa to do it, because we're talking about your nipples here, and often if you're more sensitive to nipples being stimulated, you're going to be more sensitive. And, you know, I just say hats off. But and also just talking about weaning, you know, saying you're going to wean right now, talking about weaning every day. You don't have to do it, talking about it with breastfeeding people who rally for your cause, who you rally for, you know, who you are one of, talking about weaning how you need to, how you don't want to, how you have to, how you can't stand it when they cry, how you're always giving in, and why am I trying again, and all this kind of stuff. It opens up a pathway sometimes to find the trick that helps. Yeah, getting your partner involved, like a whole other talk. It takes me like years. Just realising that we may be able to do it in our sleep, we may be able to do it without thinking, we may be doing it for years. It doesn't mean lactation doesn't cost us. We know energetically it costs us. Gestation, birth, and lactation, cumulatively, you know, it can cost us up to 200,000 calories. Is that right? From Picano. I'll get the reference out. So it's taking up energy, and, you know, that makes sense in a way. If you have aversion, I thought in the beginning, I really thought it was my just sleep to have restorative regeneration. I needed deep restorative cycles of sleep. I noticed a direct correlation between struggling on the day, having multiple falls if I didn't do it. I thought the aversion was that. I thought it was my body. Has anyone read Dr. Gabor Mate, The Cost of Hidden Stress? It's a fascinating book. It's about like the biopsychosocial phenomena of health conditions, particularly how hidden stress manifests in your body. In very biological ways. So he even talks about asthma, multiple sclerosis, things like that, having a societal, how do you call it? A societal aspect to it, and also about your managing of stress, and if you mismanage stress. So I thought that, you know, my body was just saying no to breastfeeding because it was costing me so much energy. So I overate and all this kind of stuff. But it's certainly true for some people. Some people can do it a lot easier than others. Sorry if I went really fast. I don't want to take up the next speaker. So that's it, really. I don't know if I've got time for questions. Probably not. But just talk to me. If not.
Thank you so much.
That's all right.
So catch Zainab downstairs during the day. Thank you very much. For me personally, that was really helpful, and I'm sure
I didn't look at you because you were tearing up. I started crying.
Talk. So coffee, toilet, or you're very welcome to stay in here if you would prefer. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Dr. Gabor Mate. Dr. Gabor Mate. Oh. I don't know if you can see it, but if you can. Yay! Oh, it looks nice. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to take a sip of water.
That was a fantastic talk.
Thanks.
The irony of having like the most fussiest baby ever during your talk, punching me in the face.
I didn't even notice. I'm sorry.
My God.
I didn't even notice. I thought you were
really
dealing with.
stressed out because I was like, I hope he's not like putting you off.
No. Is that because he was fussing before he went to sleep?
Yeah, he's going through a 6-month regression, so he's
No, I didn't notice, but it's probably annoying for you. But I'm going to try and get something similar and post it online so you can listen when you're in peace and quiet.
He literally went off to sleep, and then everyone started clapping, and he went, "Oh no!"
I don't know how to take it off. Thank you.
It actually is that.
Shall I mic you up?
Yes, please.
Certainly. So anywhere comfortable for you? Pocket, back pocket, that's it. And then we'll just pop that right
Actually,
here.
what is in that pocket? Okay, that's fine. Yeah, lovely.
And then just
Click in the.
back.
Yeah,
There we go.
lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I was. Ah, fabulous. Karen, I don't think Mark would have stayed quiet as well as Karen did.
Karen did say you talk.
Yeah.
There was a lot of time they normally have an interview, but there was a miles of like, I'm just going to talk for 45 minutes. Amazing.
No, I did listen to some of it a few years ago, and then I wanted to push it for a while. So I used to follow them on Twitter, so you get updates regularly.
Yeah, I'm like fit from behind. I don't do exercise anymore, so I have no time to listen to podcasts.
Double in one.
Did you say chocolate? Did you say wine? What did you say?
Chocolate or wine, but
Oh. No. Oh, you need to meet the boobs!
nice to see you.
And thank you for not making the nipples black. People seem to think that because your breasts are black, the nipples will be black, and it's like, no, they're a darker brown.
And so I wasn't quite sure what I was getting, so I ordered a bunch of different colours, and I thought, well...
I know, these are good. These are good.
This one got a little lumpy. I don't have a pattern, I just make it up as I go. So
Breasts
I decided
sometimes get a
they're,
little
black
lumpy.
ducks.
Sometimes breasts get a little lumpy. They're always a little lumpy. Thank you very much. I won't chuckle with them. Yet. Oops.
She's one of my helpers. She helps me out online, and I've finally met her one face to face, which is great. But yeah, I never thought I was going to get into it because I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher all my life. I'm a natural life skills teacher. I do emotional well-being and all that. And it was just by accident I got into this. And then she was like, "Why don't you do this as a profession?" I'm like, "I don't want to become a doctor. It's boring." too much education. And then I found out, oh, some people do that. So I'm actually one of the only doers in West London.
What? In London?
West London.
There should be tons of you.
There's not many Asians.
Yeah.
Not many Asians at all.
What about Birmingham?
Our feedback was that our breaks were too short, and then I think because we were running
I don't
over,
know many in this area, so I've had lots and lots of
it was people were
contact from East London.
lingering, and then they trickled in through the second talk.
I don't know.
Third talk.
I'm terrible.
I'm going to go out and shout at everyone in a bit. Hopefully I get everyone in.
Okay, so when I grew up in Twickenham,
But you might find people
and I'm
Okay.
in London, Twickenham area.
5 children of people trickling in and stomping out.
I live in Downsville.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but the thing is, I just moved somewhere else.
I know.
People were asking me outside. I know. Yeah, there's so many people asking me like outside of the city.
I know.
There's just no point.
Who was talking yesterday? What's the name of the woman who did the Black Diversity Matters type thing? Ruth. Her. She was saying, actually talking about us as well, she was saying that some people will go to her because she's a black doula. But actually, the biggest thing is because she's such a breastfeeding advocate for black women and everything else that they go to her for that more.
Yeah.
And she was really interesting. Like, what's the reason you came to me? Is it the right demographic? Is it the right education? Is it this? Is it this?
Yeah, but for me, I'm the only one in the UK that speaks Hindi and Urdu. I'm the only one. It's like, I have to advertise and I said, you need to become one. We need more Asian people.
Yeah.
We need people from like different languages.
Like the diversity thing. It's like
But it's also that people think that it's only for celebrities. That's
Doulas,
the one I just had.
It's a luxury, isn't it?
A friend of the one who was my client recently, she's Latvian, and she said to me, she goes, my family will make fun out of me saying you're a celebrity, so you're going to bring it. And she actually quietly gave me that paper.
Yeah, but you are working nationally back in this.
I'm actually quite sweaty.
So we have this office. My husband's in South Africa, and we're moving back to Cape Town.
Well, I think you get Safari Park.
It's what?
Safari Park.
Yeah, there are 9.
Oh, right.
Mountain, but yeah, that's one of the things that we're talking about now is that free birthing and delivery. I can't even here and get it right on South Africa because I go. So unless you because if you English people going over, it's really it's got so problem about free birthing. Well, a lot of people in rural areas obviously don't have any rights, so they have and so trying to work out how much university to do there and do the bachelor the big advertising because
I normally do that anyway. I take my own breath.
It would be nice. Yeah, it could work. And then you can borrow the money. Yeah, that's what it is. But I really like those now.
Yesterday I didn't know that because there's no sound here. So I just sat there. I was sat there going into it, and the downstairs everyone was sitting down.
We're getting there now. Yesterday with the learning.
Is it a limited stream? Yeah, I think we need to work it out. We don't really know what we're doing in this area, but yeah, I think we would do it for a limited time. I don't know if they would do like pay and watch it. So yeah, I mean, obviously, it's around 1,000 dollars.
But I'm quite happy to see it, but I get invited to the university to talk and I don't want to not be able to go and do my talk because everyone's
I was going to say, if we work out what we're doing, then maybe we can let everyone know when we're planning on doing, then you can kind of get checked.
yes. We'll see when we get there.
Can you take a couple of snaps while you're talking?
Oh, yeah.
On social media.
Love photos. Where are you from? Because I know someone who sounds exactly like you.
Okay, so I'm from Harrow originally, sort of outer northwest London, and then live in Bedfordshire now in Lane Buzzard.
You and her have the exact same voice.
Okay, so who is she?
Oh, a woman I used to know at school. She was one of the parents.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't think we've met before. I've stalked her online and watched as many snippets as I can. But no, really looking forward to it.
Good, yeah. I'm looking forward to hearing it. I think. Literature.
Oh, I need to. If you can go ahead and find your seat, I've called for people downstairs to come up, so hopefully they'll be joining us in a bit.
I don't think we're going through the system.
It will. There's like no sound.
Oh, here
Like you don't. Yeah, they've turned it down because.
No one looked up, you see.
Oh, they won't be able to hear it in here, so they can only hear your voice projecting.
Ah.
But if we turn up the sound, what happens is you get a feedback.
I was sat there and I was listening to.
Yeah.
Let's speak twice. Okay.
Okay. So. Sorry, my voice is still not that, and after yesterday it's gone even more now, so yeah, I'll go ahead and introduce our next speaker. She is the founder and owner of Abuela Doulas, and I'm sure you guys have probably already heard her name. She's done quite a few TV and radio shows recently on the topic of infant and maternal mortality in the Black community, or Black and minority ethnic community. A lot of the topics that we brought to you over the last over the 2 days are around these sort of issues, and I think sometimes we can be at risk of thinking it doesn't pertain to us because we are not Black or minority ethnic, but actually the people that are in that demographic don't need to hear those issues because they experience them. So we've brought them to people that maybe aren't aware of them, and we're trying to make them a bit more we're trying to bring them to the forefront. So if you will welcome, please, Mars Lord.
So I'm going to start the way I normally start, and so that you understand exactly what you're getting and how we're going to go through. The first thing I'm going to say, particularly to this room, I have no time for white fragility. I have no time, you laugh, but I have no time for white discomfort. I have no time for white centering, white saviorism, or white tears. Because what I'm talking about is the fact that Black women are dying. And when you sit and cry when you hear these things or you hear the stories, what happens is the room turns its attention away from the fact that Black women, Asian women are dying so that they can hold you in your discomfort. You have me for an hour. You can live in your discomfort for an hour. I am 52 and have lived in discomfort for 52 years, and will live in discomfort until the day I die. So I like to be very clear at the beginning so that you know what you're getting. I have no time for those things. My family, my community are dying. Let's make sure we get this the right way round. Black and birthing. Okay, so as Janelle said in the introduction, the reason that you're hearing it is because you need to hear it. We know it and we've known it for years. The Embrace studies, which we'll look at in a little bit, have always been there. These figures have always been there. And I'm over people getting all excited about it like it's some new statistic when black birth workers, black midwives, black doctors, black scientists have been banging on about this for decades. And for decades, the white birthing community, the white scientific community, the white maternal community has ignored it. Someone said to me just yesterday on Facebook, you really need to get those figures out there, Mars. If it's been going on for so long, maybe that's something you should talk about. We've been talking about it for years. Somehow it ain't true until the nice white lady says it. There's a yesterday, and that's what prompted the conversation at me. There was another BBC Radio podcast where a scientist, using her own statistics and ignoring her own research, talked about how actually it's not really race. It's just what happens to all women. And, you know, hey-ho, these things. But I digress. Diversity and inclusion. Or one of my slides, I totally didn't look at it properly and it's a little bit wide, and this isn't that one. You'll recognise it when you see it. Diversity and inclusion. Diversity is very much a buzzword. Everyone wants to talk about diversity. Everyone wants to make sure they're diverse. It's important to be diverse, to be diverse, to be diverse, to be diverse, because diversity is not the normal. Diversity is the thing you tack on the side. So I'll give you a very simple example of how and why diversity is something you tack on the side. A rather lovely Asian actor, stroke rapper, Riz Ahmed, says, when you talk about diversity, it's like you're the burger and I'm the chips on the side. And you can give or take with the chips. Maybe you'll have them, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll order a salad. Actually, frankly, maybe you just won't bother with the side because you just want your burger. Inclusion, that's the seasoning. That's the ingredients. That's what's inside the burger. That comes with the burger. When we say woman, we mean white. If you don't believe me, let's look at all the things that you know about and think about feminism. Where are the black women in that? Do you know that black women weren't allowed, or a group of black women weren't allowed at the Pride Festival? That's what diversion is. Diversion. That's what diversity is, rather than inclusion. Do you know that when the suffragettes marched, and black women were involved in that, they were told that they could march, but they should march at the back? Feminism has failed black women, and currently continues to fail black women, because the normal and the neutral, when you say the word woman, means white. Louise is going to talk a bit later about diverse images, diverse imagery. People like Louise and I have done a lot of work to get inclusion in the imagery. And yet within your own leaflets, your own things that you do, you're hardly using them, and when you're using them, you normally use us to reinforce a negative point and a negative stereotype. That's not what inclusion is. Inclusion means that when you say, I want to represent all. You represent all. But when you give me that nonsense about how colourblind you are, how you don't see race, how these things don't matter because you think everyone's the same, that's why I'm 5 times more likely to die in the perinatal period than you. Because you don't see how I'm treated. Because it's not because of the colour of my skin, because you have the privilege to live in that lofty place where you can claim not to see what I live with every day. My oldest son is 26 now. The vast majority of you in this room, unless you are black or Asian, will not have to live through the teenage years that I had to live through, that I will live through with my youngest child. He's on his way to school. He went to a very good school in just north of London, or just in North London. Queen Elizabeth's, QE boys, where the top few % of the country apparently go. I just thought he was Jake. And very distinctive uniform, very distinctive bag with his rugby kit. How many times do you think my son was stopped and searched on his way to school, on his way to a rugby match, on his way home from school, on his way to an event for school? He didn't even tell me the tiniest amount. He told me of a few occasions. This is my son's life. My son went to university up in Liverpool, a lovely Russell Group red brick university in Liverpool. And shortly after he arrived, he was pushed up against the wall by policemen. Who are you? We've been looking for you. He opened his mouth. His very clear-cut North London accent came out. Oh, it's not you. Piss off. When he was stopped in school uniform and they asked him what was in his bag, and he told them it was a rugby kit, they swore at him and abused him and told him that he was lying. And when they opened his rugby kit and tipped it on the floor, they told him to fuck off. Because he was wasting their time. Because I was round the corner from my house just a few weeks ago, and a young black guy was on his bicycle, and 4 plainclothes policemen jumped out of their car and pushed him up against the wall. Where's the knife? Where's the knife? Where's the knife? I stood with my phone, and I watched, and I stood witness for that young man. You don't have to do that with your children. So when you tell me that you don't see race, that's what you don't see. You don't see the conversations that I have to have with my children every day. When it comes to pregnancy and birth, you don't know the conversations I need to have with my children. You weren't with me 2.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when I was in a private hospital with a client who gave birth. A private hospital, because obviously it couldn't possibly happen there, where her husband is white and she's Asian. She had a beautiful birth, which I'm really glad of, because I had box seats at the Royal Albert Hall, and as my arse hit the chair, that was when I got the phone call. She had but you know, these things, when you're a doula. Lovely overnight staff, lovely overnight team. Sat with her, loved her. One of the women said, and this I couldn't understand because it's a private hospital, oh, I don't think we've got any food left. But unlike the NHS, when they meant food, they actually meant some kind of nice food. But the midwife went off and came back with an absolute smorgasbord. We were like, wow, there's no way the 3 of us are eating all of this. The next morning, so I leave them about 1:30 in the morning. I'm back in my bed by 2:15, and by 8:30 my phone is ringing. Please read the email that we've sent you, Mars. Please read the email. We can't talk. The racist midwife that booked us in, the racist midwife that abused me when I arrived, is my dedicated carer today. I'm so scared. She's examined me really roughly. She talks to me like I have special needs. She talks to me as though I'm stupid. And when she talks to my white husband, she talks nicely to my white husband. So I spent an entire day sat in a room protecting an Indian woman from a racist midwife. But obviously, No one sees colour, right? Because we're all just people. We are the burger, not the chips. We're not the side, the afterthought, the perhaps the maybe to your world and your life. Did you know, and it might shock you, that the majority of the population of the globe is not white? Did you know that when you are called white, you get upset? Because why should you be racialised the way that you racialise? Jon Snow, veteran news reporter, makes a comment. I've never seen so many white people in one place. Over 2,700 complaints to Ofsted or Ofcom. How dare he racialise us? And yet, you racialise black people, Asian people, all the time. We're the burger. We're not your optional extra. When you stick our pictures on your leaflets, why are you doing that? What does it mean while you're doing that? Are you ticking a box so that you can remain colourblind? Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, woman, person of colour, black. Different phrases for describing black people. I, myself, am unapologetically black, very happy to be black, very proud to be black, and frankly, if you don't like the blackness, that's your issue, not mine, because I was born in this gorgeous melanated skin, and I love it, and my children love their skin, despite the fact that so many times they were told how much prettier they would be if, how they would look better if, despite the fact that all the imagery that you all use, despite the words and the books and the shows that you have, show us that actually white is normal, white is neutral, white is woman. Don't get hung up on the terms. The doula organisation I used to belong to that still struggles with diversity and inclusion, there was a very important conversation going on about diversity and inclusion. And they sidetracked it and they parked it because someone didn't like the term woman of colour. Someone. We're allowed to define ourselves and who we are. We're allowed to like and not like the things that we like and we don't like. But when you take those red herrings, and when you use those red herrings as a reason not to hold the mirror up to yourself, to see the way that you behave, to see the way that you respond, to see the way that you react to the women of colour, the black, Asian women who need your support, when you get hung up on that language, we die, and we continue to die. I forgot to tell you, because I think I didn't put it in this. My name is Mars. Most people think, in fact, let's go back. Most people think, oh, like the chocolate. I think you've already worked out in the first 15 minutes, absolutely nothing sweet about me. I have no interest in being stroked and coddled and loved, or that hug a black person moment that people have after I finish talking. I spoke somewhere and a white woman came up to me afterwards and went, oh, thank you. Seriously. She's lucky she's living. I am not your pet. I have 3 daughters and 2 sons. My middle daughter, I think it was, I was on a bus with her one day. Her curls were looking particularly luscious, which was a miracle, really, because she never sat still for anything. But so her hair was looking particularly luscious, and we were on a bus. And a white woman walked through and just ran her hands through my daughter's hair, because that's what you all do. Oh, I love your hair. Can I touch it? And already you've touched it. That's assault. That's racist. Don't be ridiculous, Mars. It's just hair. I liked it. That's why I touched it. I like breasts. I don't think I'll ask. I'll just walk up to random people and just squeeze their breasts. Oh, I love your breasts. See, you're sat in the wrong place. I love your breasts. Squeeze. You wouldn't do that, right? Those are microaggressions. Those are the things that we live with every day. These are the reasons why we have some of the problems and the issues that we have with our health. There's an American term, a term coined by an American professor, Arlene Geronimus, and it's called weathering. You see the cliffs when you go to the edge of a country, or anywhere really, you see a cliff, and you see the way the waves batter it, and you see the stones and the bits of earth and the grass that fall down and the holes that are left, the continual battering through the seasons, day in, day out, nighttime, daytime, spring, summer, autumn, winter, continual, 24 hours, the battering. Oh, it's so beautiful to see the waves battering. That's what weathering is when you are black. Those continual waves, microaggressions, macroaggressions, hitting you, attacking you, leaving stress and cortisol in its place. But of course, race has nothing to do with birth and breastfeeding, does it? Because we're all just women, just birthing people. Wait, the default, the neutral, is white. But Mars, you can talk about these things, but I have had really bad birthing experiences. It's not just black women. Let's talk about your weathering. Let's talk about the colour of your skin. Let's talk about the perception that people have of you. Tricia, you're fabulous because you gave me these today. Knitted boobs. We're at a breastfeeding festival. Normally, when you'll make black boobs, you use a jet black for the nipple. Little tip. They're not. But you see, these things matter because you're going to use probably some form of tools and props in your talks, in your sessions with people. So just a tiny little bit of research will help. We come in so many different shades. When we look at these statistics, and I'm sorry for the blurriness, I really screwed that one up. Black women. What does it mean, black women? How black? What black? Which continent? What country? What grouping? If we look closer into the statistics, we see that the people most at risk in the UK, and incidentally, I don't talk to the LGBTI group because one, I have no statistics, and two, it's not my lifestyle. However, lifestyle, that's the wrong word. It's not my life. It's not the way I am and identify. But when they speak, I listen and I support and I work with my own language, because how can I talk to you all about inclusion if I'm not doing the work myself? So I will use the term woman because the research is based on black and Asian minority ethnic women, and they haven't even begun to touch what goes on within the trans community. The women most at risk, those of Jamaican origin. That's me screwed. That's my children's group. Nigerian, Pakistani. Those are the three top groups. Then we have the Polish, the travelling communities. Did you know in Ireland, Northern Ireland, 46% of the 46% of the maternal mortality statistics, 46% of the people that die in the perinatal period are refugees. But it's all right, because we don't see colour, and medicine isn't racialised, and it's all women, isn't it? It's all women having these same experiences. So when someone like the professor that spoke in the podcast yesterday poo-poos race, you have to ask, what is happening? Why black women are 5 times more likely to die than white women. Asian women twice as likely. Women of mixed race, mixed heritage are almost twice, just under twice as likely as white women to die. Strangely, I've discovered that I haven't discovered. Chinese women are less likely to die, but what I have learned is that a huge number will use, a tea. Did it in another talk, so that slide isn't on here. But they use this tea with some herbs, and science has shown that if it's used in the first month postnatally, they have much better outcomes. The jury, I think, is out on what happens if they use it for longer. But surely that speaks to cultural references, cultural practices, which over here are often put aside and forgotten in the need to keep you all comfortable in who we are as we hide away who we are so that you don't feel discomfort. So that when my 6-foot sons walk down the road towards you, you don't clutch your bag or cross the road or just very casually put your head down and hope he doesn't see me and, let's follow the thought through. Mug, stab, attack you. Because that doesn't suit the narrative, does it? And the narrative is everywhere, that the most dangerous beings on this planet are black men who cannot wait to attack you all. And I say men advisedly. My youngest is 15. When you are black, you are infantilized when you're an adult, and as a child, you are spoken of and regarded as an adult. Read the papers. Read the differences in the stories. Adult black males between the age of 15 and 19. Poor, deluded, bullied white boy of 21. Three things, I'm told, why black women are more likely to die. Genetics. These black bodies, you see, so predisposed to these conditions. Not easy. Education. Well, not quite as clever. Socioeconomics. Well, they're poor, aren't they? Who's got the money? So let's look at genetics. When you say that the reason we have worse outcomes is because we are predisposed to certain health conditions, why is it that black women born and raised on the African continent, Asian women born and raised on the Asian continent, when you remove the socioeconomics, do far better than black and Asian women who live in this civilized, well-developed, highly medical, hugely researched West? Why do we do worse over here than at home in our countries and continents of origin? When you blame black bodies for dying in childbirth, in the days post-birth, during pregnancy, you are pointing yourselves back to the study and the belief of eugenics, started by a group of white men who decided that I am barely above the level of a gorilla and way below what it is to be human. Well, we don't think like that anymore, Mars. 2019, we've moved on. Have you read the scientific papers? Do you know that there is the spirograph which deals with lung capacity and stuff that's going on there, has a button to adapt for race? Did you know that within the medical curriculum there are books, some outed, some probably not, talking about how differently we all respond to pain? Did you know that when a black woman questions her care, she's labelled aggressive and bullying, and of course the tears flow if you don't do as I say? Oh, you're threatening me, I'm going to have to withdraw care from you. Do you know, well, you won't know because you're not with me, how many black women I have tried to get into birth centres who, for all sorts of reasons, are not allowed in birth centres, or go into birth centres and within 4 hours are told, we think there's probably an obstruction, we're going to move you to the labour ward. And yet those same birth centres I've been in with so many white clients that can be labouring all day and night and not moved. But it's okay, because we don't see colour. When you blame black bodies, you align yourself to eugenics. Do white bodies really not have predisposed conditions? What happens when we discover those predisposed conditions? Let's look at smoking. 16% of white women, pregnant white women, smoke. That was the last figure I saw. It's probably higher. I'm reasonably convinced that most of us don't tell doctors and healthcare professionals the full truth for fear of judgment. How much wine do you drink, Mars? Oh, just a glass every week. Maybe 2 if I'm at a party. Black women, 4%, maybe lower, that smoke. So what happened when we discovered that smoking mothers produce low-weight babies? Money, resources, campaigns. Back to sleep. When Jake, who's about to be 27, God, I'm only 27 myself, I don't know how the maths lines up. Somehow it works. Somehow. What am I going to do when he's older than me? And Diamond's son died. I think his name is Sebastian. He died. Cot death, sudden infant death syndrome. Studies had been done, and Diamond became the face of cot death. We started putting our babies on their backs. We put them back to sleep, is the phrase. And within 1 year, we saw the cot death rate drop by 75%. 75% in 1 year. We saw a huge increase in the cessation of smoking. But when it's black women dying, well, it's their own fault, isn't it? It's their bodies. It's not us. So think about it. What does it say about you when you blame the victim? If a woman is being raped, the rapist doesn't say to her, tell me, how do I stop raping you? If black women are dying and they're struggling, stop asking us what you must do to stop us dying. Hold up the mirror and have a look. What does it say when you blame our bodies? What about the morbidity rates for women not born and raised in the West? From next year, you're going to hear me talking a lot more about the near misses, because we've got the statistics for the people that die. What about the near misses? And I have seen a few. Education. You're all here because you have an interest in breastfeeding education, breastfeeding support, in whichever area of breastfeeding that you're working with? What do your resources look like? Going back once again to the doula organisation that I was part of, their idea of diversity was to take an Instagram picture, which I'm sure they will have gotten permission for, of a black birthing mother and her Instagram account, and the front cover of their magazine, because this is what diversity looks like, was a naked black woman rising from the water. No story, no explanation, no reference, no point of contact in that entire magazine about this naked black woman. Because you see, we are not human beings, we are fetishized and eroticized. When you sit and you listen to a woman talk about how she called for breastfeeding support, and the midwife called in another midwife who called in a doctor to have a look at those nipples. But it's okay, because we don't see colour. And, you know, we've got to learn. Oops. Why do only white middle class women on the main access education? What is it that we're doing in our support groups, in our presentations, in our talks, in our books, in our leaflets, in our conversations? What is it that we're doing that prevents them from coming to us? And if they don't come to us, why are we sat in our ivory towers, shaking our heads at one another saying, well, we tried this and they still don't come? We need to do some outreach. And still you sit. The word is outreach. Where are these communities? Where are these people? Why aren't they coming to you? But of course, we know that James Marion Sims experimented on enslaved women. Anarka, Betsy and Lucy. 3 women, beautiful painting of them, gorgeously dressed, meekly kneeling, one of them on a hospital bed, 2 peeping behind a curtain, 3 or 4 well-dressed white doctors discussing black birth. Do you honestly think that's how it happened? When James Marion Sims took his black enslaved women and operated on them 14, 15, 27 times without analgesia. Do you honestly think they were just cutely there, fully dressed on a bed? And those doctors, those white men that were in there, were they doctors or were they rich patrons? Were they people who paid to come and gawp? You see, we are fetishized and eroticized, and our naked bodies are a source of entertainment for you. The Venus Hottentot with her large bottom, a circus exhibit, a painting, a discussion point. And then here we are in 2019 with all these years of weathering, all these years of intergenerational trauma. And you'll believe me about intergenerational trauma because I shall mention the fact that there's the Holocaust intergenerational trauma study. Why should they put their black breasts in your white hands? When your own resources and paperwork shows nothing of them. When your research comes off of the back of them. When black men in Tuskegee were given the syphilis injection without being told what it was and what it did, and then sent home to make love with their wives, killing themselves, their wives and their children. But hey, of course we'll come to you for our education, because you've shown how much you care Think about what you're saying and why you're saying it. Think about the images that you're using and why you're using them. What does your imagery look like? Is it just negative? Socioeconomics, well, she's poor, isn't she? Really? We die because we're black and we're poor? Serena Williams, arguably one of the most wealthy black women we all know about. Still hoping to become her bestie, not working, but mentioning her name as often as I can in the hope that she says, "Hey Mars, I love you, and I just want to buy you a 5-bedroom house with a pool." Oh, Serena, what were you thinking? Serena Williams, day after Olympia was born. I can't breathe. Oh, shades of Eric Garner. I can't breathe. If you don't know who Eric Garner is, then for shame, and Google. I can't breathe. You're all right, it's just the medication. I can't breathe. I have a history of pulmonary embolism. I need a CT scan and a heparin drip. The medication is confusing you. The medication is confusing you. I'm guessing that she accessed the best medical attention, the best private hospitals, the best obstetricians and staff. They put a Doppler on her leg and found nothing. Eventually, because she was able to, she got a doctor to listen. They found 3 blood clots in her lungs. 3. That woman could have died. Olympia could be motherless. We'd all be saying, "Gosh, isn't it awful that such a healthy woman could die after birth?" The professor that spoke on that podcast, and I don't want to demonise her, but one of the things she said that jumped out to me was her parting advice to the young black woman that said, "I've seen these statistics and they scare me, what can I do?" Well, if you're healthy, you shouldn't really be at risk. You'll be at much less risk. You'll be fine. I think Serena, with her education, with her socioeconomics, with her healthy black body, might beg to differ. Does money lessen the risk? Well, I just told you about the woman that I spent the day with in hospital. I mean, everyone eventually got nicer to her. I was so super nice, you'd have thought I was the chocolate bar that day. I was just so nice to all of the stuff. So that I think that the midwife went off and Googled me and discovered that I don't take any crap from anyone. And by the end of the day, apologised to me if she'd gotten in my way. It's like, darling, you're doing your job. You're the midwife. You have to do what you do. I'm doing my job. I'm supporting my client. Where are the resources? We can throw the money at SIDS. We can throw the money at smoking. We can throw the money at white issues. But here we are, 30, 40 years after people raised the clarion call, and we are still just going to do a little bit of research and find out what's going on. Find out if black women really are dying because they're black. Are we worth spending money on? Or are we too black, too poor, and too stupid for you to care? We're not discriminated. We are not failing. Our bodies are not failing. We are not dying because our bodies are black, but because you look at us as black. So, a couple of stories. Mars, I've been to the doctor 5 times and I've been fitting since my baby was born, and the doctor has told me it's just stress, I should go away. What did the doctor do? The doctor told me it was just stress, so I should go away. How many times did you go? 5 times. This time, go back and say to the doctor, I've read the Embrace studies, and I do not want to be one of the statistics that you hang on your wall because I'm telling you there's something wrong with me and my body. But I'm sure she was just being aggressive, and the poor doctor was just protecting himself from this absolute raging beast of an animal that was ready to tear him from limb to limb and stab him when she said, but I think there's something wrong. White American woman married to a Sri Lankan man. She's very blonde. They have 2 daughters. like their mother, very blonde, light eyes. They have a glorious home birth of their third baby, a boy, dark like his father, dark hair, dark skin, dark eyes. The midwife takes one look at this baby and the yellow tinge of his skin, and that family are scared out of their home into hospital for lumbar punctures, for tests, because this midwife has decided that there must be jaundice, because she doesn't see colour. She hasn't looked at the husband. All she has seen is the wife and the white babies. 48 hours of hell that couple endured for nothing. Common sense, people. Common sense. I'm sure when those of you that heard Ruth yesterday, and if you didn't, and there's an opportunity to hear her presentation, do listen to it. I say to breastfeeding counsellors all the time, as a very simple aside, tell me how you would tell me it might be thrush. Well, obviously, your breasts might be a bit pink and red. Obviously. I'm going to read this one. This one isn't great. It's not recent, but this woman still cries. This was my first experience of birth. I was almost 20 years old and interrupted nursing training to have my daughter. A straightforward pregnancy, no complications, and despite being a fortnight post predicted dates, I was in otherwise good health. Remember what the professor said? As long as you're healthy. I'm mixed race. It's decided that I should be induced when I was 14 days overdue. I felt knowledgeable about birth, having read all my mother's nursing textbooks and attended antenatal classes, education, with my local midwife and health visitor. I was induced and given an enema on the antenatal maternity ward, which is why you know it's not a recent story. This was evening, around 9 p.m. By 10 p.m, I was having strong contractions and asked my neighbour in the next bed, could you please get a midwife? I'm in so much pain, I think something might be wrong here. The midwife arrived, took one glare at me and said, this better not be a false alarm, young lady. I felt scared and bewildered. Why was she talking to me like this? She escorted me down the corridor where she proceeded to gesture to the examination bed where she roughly examined me. At one point she exclaimed, well, I strongly suggest that you have an epidural. There's no way you will cope with labour if you can't even cope with this examination. It doesn't exactly hurt. You might have thought about this when you were making this baby. She was so full of anger. I was really distressed. My mother arrived as my support as labour progressed. She's white and a well-respected nurse in the hospital. The midwife recognised her straight away. Not only was there a shift in her attitude, but it seemed that she preferred talking to my mother about everything from the staff situation to a course she'd recently done in counselling. I just lay there on that hospital bed feeling fearful and abandoned. As I was progressing in labour, I was examined again. This time the midwife had something strong smelling on her hands, a citrus smell. My baby was born very quickly after that. But I'd torn during labour. I was overjoyed to see my daughter for the first time. I don't remember one kind word from that midwife. And my baby died at 19 days old. I never took her home. She died from strep B infection. I was robbed of my baby and my birth experience. I would love to face that midwife now, but I doubt I'll ever get the opportunity. These are the women that you're supporting when you do your breastfeeding support work. You see, when you're doing breastfeeding support work, you take histories and you talk about their birthing journey and their stories. And when you say, no, 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 not black women, all women, you silence them, you erase them, and you lose the very thing that might have caused them to lose a child or their lives. And these are the people that you're supporting, which is why you have no excuse to tell me that you do not see colour, that you believe that all people are made equal. Yes, race is a social construct constructed by white people to keep black and brown people down and in their place. When Irish indentured servants, I can work, even if it's 100 years, I can pay it off and I am free, was seen to be spending time and strengthening ties with enslaved, you are my property, this is what you are forever. Race was constructed because you might be an indentured servant, but thank God you're not black. Yes, it's a social construct, and it's constructed for your privilege and for your ability to be and do the things that you be and do. Comparison between women who died and women who did not. Let's have a look. One of the reasons that we're given pre-existing medical comorbidities, 8.7%. Let's skip down. Inadequate antenatal care, 46.9%. Race not an issue. Substance misuse is 12.2. What do we do about substance misuse? How much money and time do we give to that? How is our work informed when we are supporting breastfeeding parents who have come through or are coming through substance misuse? Black babies have 121% increased risk for stillbirth and are 50% more likely to suffer neonatal death compared to white babies. The Office for National Statistics. Now, we know the risks of not breastfeeding. We know how important it is that human babies get human milk. And because I'm speaking in a room full of breastfeeding supporters and workers and people invested in it, you know that the default to that is not me saying, God, formula is the worst thing in the whole entire world. But you know what I'm talking about. So how important, how much more important is it for black women and their black babies? But Mars, black women have the highest rates of initiation of breastfeeding. What's the parameter? What's the category that works in? What are the rules and the guidelines for that? Putting a baby to your breast briefly once, it's initiated. Where's the ongoing support? Where are you in your thought processes when a black woman, an Asian woman comes to you and talks to you about the issues that she's having, and you look at her and you say, well, you're an Asian woman, you're probably very submissive and you need a white saviour to save you from that brutish, overbearing Asian man that you are married to. White narrative, continually repeated. So when you're working, and I keep saying it, you do not have the luxury of not seeing colour. We're dying, and our babies are dying. This should no longer be a silent tragedy. The reason that I give these talks, the reason that I'm invited to breastfeeding festivals, to baby wearing festivals and conferences, the reason that I'm talking at birth trauma places, the reason that people are giving me the platform to speak is because this has been a white silent tragedy. If white women were dying at the rates at which black women were dying, or even at the rates at which Asian women were dying, and that is far too high, then something would be done about it. Yes, maternal mortality rates are dropping. Yes, it's a rare event. But within it, black mortality rates are rising. Black babies are 121%, 50% more likely to die These things are important. Weathering is important. The way, you don't know how that woman has been treated before she's come to you, not seeing her colour and thinking it's just breastfeeding. If you heard Ruth, I'm sure that Ruth talked about the cultural differences, about the way that across the world, black and brown people have always fed their babies, and we co-sleep and we wear them, and yet you all pretend as though you invented these things, having come in and raped and pillaged our continents and dragged us from our homes and broken our families apart so that you can live with the narrative that this one white guy told me at a fertility conference. Oh, your lot, the fathers never stay around, do they? But you say that. But that's what you all read and accept and believe, because the stories that you see, the narrative you do not see is the narrative of the black family. The black father that provides for and is there for and stands for and fights for his family. Because you see, we're busy being stabbed and shot in drug-filled cars outside of chicken shops. Because that's the narrative that you believe. And when that woman comes to you for support, that's the narrative that she has to live in. So when she's nervous of you and your support, it's because she knows how you see her, and the responsibility to change her mind is yours, not hers. I am Mars, god of thunder, god of war. We have done gentle rain, and you still leave us dying. We did not lose the chains of enslavement by waiting till the nice white lady said it wasn't really a good idea. We rose up and we fought. And the reason I am not sweet like a chocolate bar is because I am unapologetically angry. I have 5 children. If they go on to have children, what is the risk to my children? What is the lack of care and support that you will give them because you don't see colour and you don't see what they live through to get to the place where they put themselves in your white hands? This is why we need more black birth keepers. This is why we need more black IBCLCs and black breast peer supporters. Because you don't see us, but they do. And when they tell me, I had this racist experience in hospital, oh, darling, it wasn't race. Doctors, midwives, healthcare professionals, they're all like that with everyone. Because actually, they're not. We need voices to join us. Do not speak to me afterwards about how non-racist you are. Don't give a crap. Genuinely don't give a crap, and I'm going to tell you why I don't give a crap. Because when you tell me how non-racist you are patting yourselves on your privileged backs and doing nothing. It is passive. You are swimming in a sea of racism, but it's okay because you are not racist. And therefore, racism can continue. If you want to join us, you need to be anti-racist. Actively anti-racist. You need to call out the things that you see. You need to look at your workbooks, your resources, your studies. You need to look at the way that you are supporting black and brown and yellow women, and you need to make a change for yourself personally, because the system and the structure is inherently racist. It has been set up, but not for us. Don't tell me how non-racist you are. I really don't care. Don't come to me after this session and unload your examples of racism on me. I'm 52. I'm thinking between here and getting home back in North London, I will probably experience some more, micro or macro. I don't need to hear it. Don't go find yourself a black person and do the little stroke and do the hug a black person day because you're feeling uncomfortable or sad or shocked by what you hear. We're not shocked. We know. We live this. But we need your voices to join us, because sadly, it ain't racism till the nice white lady says it's racism. So be our nice white lady and stand up and call out racism. When there is an opportunity for people to talk about their lived experiences, don't you grab it because you want the paycheck, the exposure, etc. If you genuinely want to help black people, brown people, sometimes you need to be quiet and you need to sit down. If you don't want to join us, either sit down or get out of the way, because black women are dying and we don't have time for your discomfort, your saviorism, your centrism, your fragility or your tears, because we are dying. Ask yourself the question, do Black Lives Matter? And when you ask why we have Black Breastfeeding Week, Black Baby Wearing Week, Black Maternal Health Week, ask yourself, not us, why we need those weeks. We need those weeks because we are dying. In the words of Angela Davis, I am no longer accepting the things that I cannot change. I'm changing the things that I cannot accept. I cannot accept the fact that my children, my sisters, my cousins, my mothers, my aunts, my community are more at risk of death than you because of the colour of their skin. If you're on the MVPs, if you're on and in national groups, if you influence policy, is it genetics? Is it education? Is it socioeconomics? Or is it that underlying foundation on which it is all built, implicit and explicit bias? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm aware that I cut your last break short, so please take 15 minutes. I am going to start at 20 after, and we will, yeah, I'll catch it up later. But yeah, go take 15 minutes. I'm not going to go into the lobby and call you back, but please do come for the next talk, because Louise has an amazing discussion about something that's been coming up the last couple of days, which is diversity in our images, in our imagery. So yeah, thank you.
So
Hello?
you can get the sound downstairs.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to minimize is the echo in the room, so people are hearing you and the speakers. We've turned down the mic in this room, but we've turned up the mic downstairs so people can hear you clearly while they see your slides done in conference room.
Okay. Okay, no problem.
So if you can't hear yourself, it should be okay, but I'm going to go check downstairs as well now that I've put you on.
Okay, fab. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Stop it. Hi. Oh yeah, that's what I'm starting with. Good. So that's excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Well. Well, this is it, isn't it? And we need to have these conversations. So.
The conversation with the practitioners were really eye opening.
Yeah, and the thing is, but you see, this is why we need to have these discussions so that more people recognise it. It was, yeah. I was like gutted when I found out I was speaking after Mars because I was like, how can you follow Mars? But it ties in quite nicely with the stuff that I'm talking about anyway. So it's, but we just have to see what happens. Obviously, coming from NCT, this is something that I've been dealing with for a long time. So this is not staying where it's supposed to. Yep. Yeah. Well, the Embrace study, the previous Embrace study had shown that black women were 4 times more likely to die, and then when the most recent Embrace was conducted, it increased to 5 times more likely, and it barely made a headline in the news. So people didn't even realise that this had been. I mean, there were some really interesting tweets that went on about how can this not be a news story, and sort of when you look at the realities of it, like Mars said, it's because nobody cares, because it's black people and it's not important. So that's why I really feel that organisations like NCT could really fly the flag, but also there's so much work they need to do themselves as well, because that's part. I think the first step really is acknowledging that there's lots to do, and NCT are very reluctant to acknowledge that, unfortunately. So yeah, well, maybe things will change when we get a new CEO. I don't think NCT will cope with that. But yeah, it is difficult. And I mean, I'm working on the paid one-to-one project at the moment. And I've really struggled with that because it is completely targeted at our core demographic, as always. And we were told from the outset there's no option for concessions. So how can you really test a service if you're not going to offer concessions during the pilot?
Do you do concessions on the one-to-one?
Yeah, so we don't at the moment in the pilot. I mean, I'm pushing, and we're hopefully going to look at it. But currently, there's no concessions on the one-to-one pilot. So the only people who can access the paid one-to-one service are those who can pay. And I've got a real problem with that. But
That's outrageous.
it is. So it is.
Yep.
It's hard, but.
Do you like the gold teardrop? Do you like the code?
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I think that the paid element of breastfeeding support is just so controversial. I don't think parents should have to. And I think that by not offering concessions, what we're actually saying is, it's that whole elitism thing of
well, if you can afford it, you can have it. But
Pardon? The myth for large,
Yep.
Sorry. No, sorry, I'm just looking what the time is. She's a friend of ours, isn't she?
Well, that's it, and it's been really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, sure. It's been really interesting to sort of see how it's panned out so far. And I'd said from the beginning, I said, you can run this in my area, but I'm telling you it's not going to be successful because there's not many people in my area who can afford to pay for breastfeeding support. I live between Birmingham and Wolverhampton. So yeah, I tend to work with Wolverhampton branch. And I said, you know, people just can't afford that, and if they can, they see a lactation consultant. So really, who are we trying to reach here? Yeah, it is.
That's such a good way of looking at it.
Sorry? Yeah, I'm a breastfeeding counsellor and a peer support trainer as well. So. But yeah, I've worked with Isabel. I love Isabel. She's fab. She's fab. Yeah, she's fab. I love Isabel. But you see, I mean, I do talk a little bit about my experiences during my talk, because it's without doubt I'm a minority, let's face it. And I think it's really important that people start to consider sort of who's in the room, who's here, and why. Because I think it's kind of accidental that I ended up in NCT, because I just literally didn't know what NCT was. I just sort of, you know, I didn't know it was a white middle class organisation, had that sort of reputation. I had no idea at all, because I literally didn't know what it was, because it wasn't on my radar, probably because I couldn't afford it. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and it continues to be. So we'll see what happens. But God, I've been pushing with them for nearly 3 years now about the diversity and inclusion and equality and stuff. But I just keep getting told it's going to take time. It's going to take years. Yeah, it's going to take years.
Problematic issue.
Yeah. It's just saying, we're doing something, go away, leave us alone, don't come back.
And who is it?
This is right. I've had conversations with Nick. Yeah, I've had several conversations with him. Quite horrifying conversations with him, to be honest. So I'm quite happy about that.
And it was like you have to do it. So they try to put more than them saying about like what you must say.
Because they do included anything in also
very political, I find. I found him very political, almost like a politician when he doesn't answer questions properly. If he doesn't agrees to disagree or whatever. You're right, Ross.
I can say hello. I'm going to keep your man company now.
So,
what did I say that out loud? Oh, with the microphone.
Yeah, we've got that on recording, Ross. No, yeah, very hard. I mean, hard. It's difficult, isn't it? Actually, because you talk, you're not actually telling us anything we don't already know. Because you're not telling us anything we don't already know. We're just sitting up there like nodding dogs, and people don't realise, do they? Hello. Hello.
Is he flirting with you?
Yes,
I'll keep having babies soon.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've had 5. I'm kind of over it.
I've got one. And everyone says, why do you have more kids? I'm like, no, it's fine. One is times 10 right now. And he's actually 10 now. But it feels like I've got a teenager.
I think I'm going to put this here so it's not keeps sliding down. So I'm looking forward to hearing your piss and take. Oh gosh, I'm terrified.
Food is vegan. I'm terrified. Just look at me.
Oh, no, I thought that when I saw the food. I was like, oh no meat for you. You have to get a steak on the way home. You can't think about the planet Mars. It's more important than black people.
I'm thinking about the planet. Where's my meat? I'm going to a car. So before I go, I'm going to text her about the steak.
There you go. You're right.
It's got room in here.
Yeah.
No, I feel like I don't even know anything and I'm like, yeah, exactly. I feel like a moron.
Hello.
Do you want to stay?
It's a cute smile.
Have you decided? What are we doing?
Yes.
I suppose we're helping you stay with
Oh, yeah.
things, but
Oh,
I
don't
did a
worry
list
about
for
it.
you and there wasn't really much.
Don't worry about it, honestly. We've managed to get a few images, I think.
If you do need your hand or anything, come and grab me.
Thank you.
Just sort of floating around the...
I knew you were busy. How old's your little one?
5 months. Lester just turned 2 right at home.
Oh, good choice. Hello.
Yesterday she was
All these people. What's going on here? Oh.
I'm just going to go and speak to them about the aircon. I'm talking to the project here because they turned it down yesterday. I think they might just be...
Okay. Yeah. Oh, nice. Hi.
I'll do some photos for you.
Yeah, fab. That's excellent. So you spoke to Lex. Yeah,
yes.
fabulous. That will be lovely. Thank you so much. So I don't know if you've spoken to her since I arrived, but there's an image release form that we need you to sign and fill out. Oh, fabulous. Excellent. And who is this?
It's Margot.
Hello, Margot. Hello. Hello. You're beautiful, aren't you? Yeah. What's going on here? Oh, you're looking at... What's that? Oh, she's looking at the mic. She says, can I grab it? Here you go, look.
We need a nappy change, naturally.
Oh, no. That's lovely. How old is she?
She's 6 months this weekend.
Yeah. So you're having your 6-month birthday? Yes. What a way to celebrate. Yeah. Well, lovely to meet you anyway. Oh.
Yes.
But I'll catch you a bit later. Yes. Thanks.
If you do take any questions, because some speakers are taking, just repeat the question. So the question was, because people they won't hear the question because they haven't got a mic.
Okay, so if someone asks
a question, say the question was.
Okay, so that they can.
Yeah, you can't really pass the mic to them if they're too far back. Yeah, okay.
Yep, fab. No, don't introduce. I don't want to do this.
I'm gonna. We said we would just like pull back about 5 or 10 minutes from the lunch break, so don't worry about time.
No, I'll probably finish a little bit early anyway. So I know the one before lunch is the hardest as well. You do know that, don't you?
Because everyone's like ready to go.
Yeah, everyone's
don't
like, I want
worry.
to eat.
Don't worry.
Right.
Right. Okay. Ready for the next one. Just quickly before I start, I know that we made an announcement earlier, but I wanted to make another announcement about some books that might have gone on a walkabout from Lindsay Hickey's stand. The microphones.
So that the people downstairs can hear you.
Of course. Hello. Sorry. I wanted to make an announcement about some books that Lindsay Hookway had on her stand that seem to have gone missing. We've got about 5 or 6 books that have disappeared, and they were set up this morning. Might have looked like they were available to take, but they weren't. So obviously, if you did, it's okay if you could just return them. No one's gonna go after you or anything. But please, if you did happen to take one, thinking that they were available to take, if you could just return them. So yeah. getting on with our next talk. Like I said, the last couple of days, there's been a lot of discussion around inclusivity with images and in the imagery that we see and use. And so I think this talk will hopefully kind of go into that in a bit more detail. Our next speaker is a breastfeeding counselor, a peer support trainer, and a doula. And she has the most amazing project, Diversity in Infant Feeding, which is a project that looks specifically at increasing the array of images that are put into all of our literature and that we see on TV and just stuff like that. So she's going to do a talk about that. Please do get involved. We're hoping it can be a bit interactive, so put your smiles on, get involved. Louise Oliver, sorry.
Thank you, Janelle. So, good afternoon, everyone. As Janelle said, my name is Louise Oliver. I am indeed an NCT-trained breastfeeding counsellor and peer support trainer, and a doula. I also have an NHS role as a community maternity support worker, and I'm the founder of Diversity in Infant Feeding. Today, I'm going to be speaking about the importance of diversity within our infant feeding imagery, and I'm also going to encourage you to explore the culture, the infant feeding culture in the UK at present, and its impact on underrepresented groups. So I'd like to begin by jumping straight in there and asking you to just watch this short clip.
Nature has been researching your milk for hundreds of millions of years. The composition of your milk is alive and changes throughout the day, the night, the months, and the years to meet your child's needs. Your milk contains stem cells. These are cells that create and repair the body and are being researched worldwide to cure conditions like Alzheimer's and diabetes. Your milk contains components that kill cancerous cells. Your body identifies bacteria and viruses found in your baby's body and environment. You then produce antibodies specifically tailored to those infections and deliver them to your child through your milk. Your milk appears to switch on a gene in your baby's body, which produces a hormone called leptin. This hormone tells your baby when his tummy is full, protecting him against overeating. Your milk contains oxytocin, a hormone that induces relaxation and feelings of well-being in your child and in you. It's all in you. Human milk, tailor-made for tiny humans.
So I'm aware that many of you may have already seen that clip before. It's well known as being the breastfeeding advert. And what I'd like to do now is just invite you to turn to the person next to you and just mention, discuss what were your thoughts on that? What were the things that jumped out at you straight away? So I'll just give you a minute or so. You really don't need much encouragement to speak to each other, do you? Gosh, you've got lots to say about that. So, if I can bring you back to the room. I think we started something here. Hello? Right. That's it. I know what it's like. Ask a room full of women who are passionate about feeding, start talking, it's hard to stop them. Would anyone like to share what their initial thoughts were on the advert? Everybody had blonde hair and blue eyes. Yeah? Anything else? Yeah?
They're all like able-bodied, white, youngish women.
Yeah? All able-bodied, white, young women. Yeah?
Quite slim as well.
Slim, yeah?
Very idealistic.
Idealistic?
It's a bit hippy-dippy.
Hippy-dippy? Okay. So younger babies, not really any older babies. Yeah?
Nice hair, very well dressed.
Yeah, nice hair, well dressed, press shirt, M&S style. Yeah? Yep, no regional accents. So, okay, so designed to be like a formula advert. Interesting, yeah.
That's what we say.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so heteronormative family dynamics there. Anyone else want to share anything more? Yes? No toddler feeding. Toddlers don't feed, do they? No. Yeah?
Very settled children, issues with breastfeeding.
Yeah, no issues with the breastfeeding at all. Yeah. So, very... Sorry?
Idealised to the point that breastfeeding is very, very easy, although sometimes we know it's the opposite.
So an idealistic view of breastfeeding and suggesting it's easy. Well, I must say that I had the privilege of seeing this breastfeeding advert before it was officially launched. I was lucky enough to bag myself a ticket to the well-known Baby Friendly conference in 2016, thanks to the colleague that was ill and couldn't make it anymore. Wouldn't have got a ticket otherwise, can't afford it. And as I sat there in that auditorium, amidst thunderous applause, in fact, it got a standing ovation. It really did, I'm not joking. The only thing that I could think, the one single thought that was bouncing around my mind was, where are all the people who look like me? You see, if you didn't notice the lack of diversity in the breastfeeding ad immediately, you could be forgiven, because we all come at life from our own lens, and it's so easy to not notice the people who are missing when you are represented. What I found most enlightening was that after I'd spoke up about the lack of diversity within the advert, I realised that my own lens had left me in a position where I've completely missed that there were lots of other people missing. You know, the immediate thought for me was that people of colour weren't present in this. But soon after I'd spoken out, lots of people started coming forward and saying, hi, well, actually, I'm not represented there either. And it was really quite an enlightening experience, because it made me look at my own biases and my own, limitations. And suddenly I realised that actually we're really missing a trick here. So who else is missing? Well, sadly, the answer's quite lengthy. We're talking about black and minority ethnic groups. We're talking about same-sex couples, everyone from the LGBTQI community. We're talking about parents feeding older children, plus-size parents, babies who are tube-fed, exclusive expressors, I think we've got one here, twins multiples, tandem feeding, older children, people who are differently abled or need walking aids, babies and children with chronic health conditions, Premature babies. The list just simply goes on and on and on. Now, there would never have been an expectation for the breastfeeding advert to include someone from all of these different groups. It would be simply impossible. But to only showcase families from one group is just quite simply inexcusable. So what happens when these families aren't represented? Well, in the 1970s, Professor George Gerbner hypothesised that the absence of or erasure of people in media contributed to social inequalities. And he stated that representation in the fictional world signifies social existence. Absence means symbolic annihilation. It's quite a strong word, isn't it, annihilation? So what's the impact of this? Well, the impact of symbolic annihilation in the infant feeding world, where do we start? So images used in health professional training are predominantly white. It leaves parents from black and minority ethnic backgrounds at very real risk of misdiagnosis of conditions such as mastitis and thrush. And it's not just because the imagery in their textbooks and their learning is predominantly white. It's actually also the descriptors. You probably often hear, oh, if your breasts have red patches. You might hear if your nipples are pink. Things that just simply don't apply to people with brown skin tones. I mean, if parents are being misdiagnosed, then surely they're more likely to cease breastfeeding and cease feeding their babies human milk. And that then puts both the parent and the baby at increased risk of poor health outcomes. And you know, this impact, it's not just for health professionals. Actually, it extends into the lactation or breastfeeding support community. You know, if we take the Breastfeeding Atlas, for example, it's a specialist must-have textbook for trainee and qualified lactation support. And it actually boasts, I've got the wording right here, it boasts as having the most up-to-date, recent and clinical innovations. But you know, it contains no clinical images of thrush or mastitis on brown breasts. Not one. And actually, in all of the 350 images in the Breastfeeding Atlas, there are only nine that involve parents, babies, or mothers of colour. How do we justify that? What is the impact? Imagine me, a black breastfeeding counsellor, going and buying the Breastfeeding Atlas because I want to extend my knowledge, I want to better serve my community, and I spend, it's quite a bit, you know, this atlas, it's not cheap. I spend the money to import it, but it's a bit cheaper if you import it and you get a few people to buy together. And then I sit down and realise that actually this prestigious book that everybody says you need to have, it doesn't give me the tools or the knowledge to support my own community. That leaves me with the question, who exactly do people want me to support? So, what message is this sending? How do you think that leaves someone like me, who gives many hours, many hours, and my other half up there will tell you, for free, supporting people? What message is that sending? So, here's some important questions that I want you to take a few moments considering. When we're thinking about feeding support, who is writing and contributing to these educational texts? Whose voices are we hearing? Which communities are we serving? And more importantly, which communities are we ignoring? What message is this sending? Now, today, I know that it's quite hard hitting and it's a lot to take in. I mean, if you look around the room, is this reflective of our society? So I'm really, really keen to get people thinking about these questions and what potential answers could be. We really need to start sitting down and looking at the very real impact that the current culture is fostering and is having on people. So I'm going to give you, again, another minute or so just to consider. Have you ever even considered which communities we're serving? Have you looked at the imagery in our literature? And yes, it's been a bit more diverse of late, but we'll talk a bit more about that later. So, which communities are we ignoring? What happens if you go in and that parent doesn't speak very good English? Are you equipped to support that family? Are the educational texts giving you what you need to support the different families that you might see? Are you even seeing those families? Like Mars said earlier, you know, we're talking about reaching out. We're labelling people as hard to reach. Why are they hard to reach? Are they hard to reach? Or is it that we're just not trying to reach them? Is it that we're not making the space inclusive enough for them to come forward? So I'd like you just to take a moment. Again, have a chat with the person next to you and I'll try and get your attention when we need to move on. But, yeah, can you ask yourselves these questions? Okay. I'm going to try and bring you back again. Yeah? It's great. Great to see so many conversations happening. Here we go. And it's great to see that everyone is so engaged and it's really encouraging to see that these conversations are flowing quite freely. And what I'd like to think is actually these are just the first conversations that you might have about this, and that they will continue after you leave the room, maybe over lunch and then beyond. So Has anyone got anything to offer for any of those questions? Do you feel like you are serving all communities when you're offering your breastfeeding support or your feeding support? No? Shaking. I can see people shaking their head. No. And how does that leave you feeling? Did you ever even notice?
I think we pacify ourselves by paying lip service to things, by telling ourselves that we support those communities, that our support is available within different communities and with different ethnicities and different cultures, but we are just paying lip service to it, and I think we need to be so much more active about it and stop worrying about cause and effects to people. It's about being direct and saying that we want to support the black community, we need more black volunteers, we need to support more black women, we need you to help us with this, rather than paying lip service. Out of our 10 volunteers that were recruited on our last intake, one of them was blackish.
So you're saying that you feel like there's a lip service being paid to feeding support. So sort of like Mars mentioned about being the chips, the side order there. Yeah, well, how we just get someone, the tokenism. As long as the peer support cohort's got one person that doesn't speak, has English as a second language.
I think also it's, and I don't want it always to boil down to money, because it's not about money, but we get commissioned to provide a service, but the commissioners that ask us to do certain things then don't give us the resources to say pay for translators, pay for interpreters, to have more promotional material. It's all, everything we do has to be based on a budget of nothing. And it's very much dictated how we spend.
So there's the commissioning limitations of funding and budgets and so
I think there's no outreach work.
no outreach work. Yeah. No. Well, when we're looking at commissioning, obviously you can use your privilege to go back to the commissioners and say, what am I supposed to do with this? And what about these communities? And actually, they need a different intervention. This is not just focused on, the main, or core demographic, as I often hear in my charity work. We want to actually reach everybody. And I totally hear what you're saying about, we need to raise the diversity within our feeding support, because as you see in this room, I don't know how many of you actually work in feeding support and how many are a parent just here because you're interested in breastfeeding the parents. But the diversity within feeding support is really quite lacking. Now, there's no research done on symbolic annihilation in relation to the infant feeding world. However, the Opportunity Agenda in America did conduct a study that looked at the impact of media and representation, but this was looking at the impact on black men and boys, and I do feel that actually this research could be, we could use the results of this when we're looking at representation within the infant feeding world. And the study found that the images have the greatest impact on the people who have the least real life experience with minority groups. So if you have never interacted or have rarely interacted with a family from one of those minority groups, let's say it's a black family, let's say it's a same-sex family, you are more likely to accept what the imagery has told you. And in this case, it's that they don't feed their babies because we're not seeing them. So if they're not there, they're invisible. They don't exist. Pretty sure I'm real. Not sure about you. So, if we're saying via our imagery that some groups of people and their babies don't feed, What messages are we sending? We're saying that babies with Down syndrome can't breastfeed. We're saying that exclusive expressing is not an option. We're saying that if you're plus size, you're not going to be able to breastfeed. We're saying that if you have a chronic health condition, you're not going to be able to feed your baby. We are saying so much by saying nothing, by showing nothing. And this is why the imagery is so important when it comes to the infant feeding world. I mean, what's highly concerning is that the most negative impact this study found was on the individual, on the person who'd been erased, on the person who doesn't exist. Because what actually happens when you don't see yourself is you start to internalise those biases. So you think, you know what, I'm not going to breastfeed. I won't feed my baby. I've never seen anyone who looks like me feeding a baby. I've never seen a baby with Down syndrome being breastfed. I've never seen a baby being tube-fed, express milk. So why would you consider it? And you know, when we think back to what Mars said earlier, a lot of these people that are not represented are the very people who are most at risk. Now, I've got 4 children, and it's very hard to accept that just based on your colour that they're more likely to die. What's even harder for me to accept is that this isn't seen as a priority. Shouldn't we be showing more images if we know that actually breastfeeding or feeding human milk is potentially an intervention that could save lives? Why wouldn't we do that? And again, what message is that sending about me and my children and all the other children of underrepresented groups? So when we talk about feeding support, who is it really that we are serving here? Is it the easy option? Is it the woman in the nice house who speaks perfect English and you don't mind sitting on her chair? Because I tell you, in my NHS job, I've been in all sorts of houses and all sorts of different situations and family makeups. And I'm telling you now, I give every single person the care that they deserve, the care that they need, the care that everybody should get. But when it comes to breastfeeding, we just don't seem to do that. We only target the common, you know, the one core demographic. So if we believe that breastfeeding and feeding human milk is important for everybody, then representation, inclusion and equity is crucial. And when I talk about equity, we're talking about access to support. It's not enough to pay lip service and say, oh, we've got a feeding support group over there, because actually, if they've got to climb 2 flights of stairs and there's no lift, how is the woman in the wheelchair supposed to get to that group? You know, how? How does that work? So we need to look further into how accessible are our services really? What are we doing to make them more accessible? But are we simply expecting other people to integrate into our existing culture? How can we expect minority groups to feel comfortable, especially if they, you know, have to fit into the current standards? Now, standards that have been set by the majority, which, let's face it, breastfeeding organisations are largely white, middle class, 30 plus, heterosexual, CIS women. You know, there's no getting away from that. The majority of feeding support roles are voluntary or low paid. I'm sure you all know that already. Yeah? And this is a huge barrier, because if you live in a family where you need 2 incomes just to survive, just to keep the roof over your head and some food in your children's stomachs, you're not going to be in a position to offer feeding support to your own community. IBCLC, it's seen as the gold standard of feeding support. But it's so bloody expensive and difficult, because if you're not a health professional now, it is really, really, really challenging to be able to go on and achieve that. And how accessible is that really? And like Mars said, where are the black IBCLCs? Where are the IBCLCs who have lived experience of real life challenges that are different to your own? They're not there because of these barriers. You know, support groups, we typically advertise them. We think, oh, we'll get some leaflets printed, we'll pop them up on the wall in Waitrose. This is my location. We'll pop them up on the wall in Waitrose. They've got a free, notice board, and we'll pop them up on the doctor's surgeries where, the baby clinics happen. And of course, they're all in English, but is that really accessible? And then, of course, not all infant feeding literature is translated into other languages. And I was really horrified, actually, because last night I sat with my other half and looked specifically at the translations available. And there are translations available, but you're off to the Best Start leaflet, the nice yellow booklet that you get. The translated version is very different. In fact, the translated version, I've got it written here, the translated version contains no statistical information on the health outcomes associated with feeding. It contains no information on milk storage. It tells you about expressing though, but not how to store the milk. It contains no information on vitamin supplementation, like the English yellow booklet. And it also has nothing, not a single mention about fathers, dads, partners. How can we go so far as to translate? We're going to actually translate this leaflet, but we're just going to translate some of the information. We're going to leave out some of the crucial information, like milk storage. And we're going to forget that, obviously if you speak a different language, you haven't got a partner. Do people really deserve that, simply for not having English as their first language? What message is that sending? We actually went to the trouble of translating it, but we chose to omit the crucial information. I'm still really shocked about that, sorry. I was really quite upset. Now, you have to wonder if this contributes to the cessation rates when it comes to feeding. Because actually, if someone who doesn't speak English as a first language doesn't realise the health outcomes associated with feeding their baby their own milk, then there's less importance placed on it. And the culture, the breastfeeding culture, the infant feeding culture in the UK is a very difficult place to exist if you're a minority group. And I'll just talk to you a bit about my own experiences. So, quite by accident, I ended up falling down the breastfeeding rabbit hole and embarked on NCT training at the tender age of 23. And I very quickly realised that I was in the minority. Now, it's quite hard to say, but I'll be honest. I felt like I had to dress smart. I felt like I had to speak differently in order for me to be taken seriously and accepted within the feeding community. Now, I'm quite a strong woman. Ask him up there, he'll tell you. But I have been through so much just by speaking out. When I spoke out about the feeding advert, I was labelled as a bully. I was told that I was accused of verbally abusing the creator, and she even went so far to have a police presence at her advert launch because there were being threats to her life, not by me. Yeah, I was indeed every inch the angry black woman that you know, the stereotype that you see. And all I'd simply said was, I know you've finished the advert and it's going out, but is there any chance you could maybe edit it slightly to be a bit more inclusive? In my NHS role, previous NHS role, I was shouted down because I dared to ask questions about the accessibility to our feeding groups. I was told, you can't talk to people like that. Do you know what I'd asked for? Stickers on every red book with the day and the time of our support group. That's all I'd asked for. Didn't ask for anything more than that. I've been at many feeding conferences and events over the years, and it's hard to really escape the fact that it looks very much like this room, with a little sprinkling of diversity, but usually the same faces, the same names, the same conversations, this big echo chamber. And whilst browsing the stalls at one of the conferences, I actually had a lady who was sitting there staring at me. And I was like, okay. And she went, oh, I love your hair. It's just fascinating. It was like this. I'm not joking. So, what have you noticed about the UK infant feeding culture? Did you even notice any of these things? You know, the failure to diversify the infant feeding culture in the UK is really quite surprising, because actually business and corporations have long recognised that diversifying and including people, it doesn't just foster creativity, it shows that people matter. It's a great way to recognise existence and engage and connect with communities. In fact, a diverse business is likely to make 35% higher income based on that fact alone. So, what better way to increase feeding rates? All we have to do is show more people. Now, Coca-Cola actually demonstrated just how easy it is to harness diversity and inclusivity to sell products more effectively with their iconic Super Bowl ad.
There's a Coke for he,
and she,
and her, and me,
and them. There's a different Coke for all of us.
especially one for him.
No feet have wandered where you've walked.
No eyes saw what you've seen.
No one's lived the life you lived.
No head has held your dreams.
To act the same would be mundane.
What a boring thing to do. That's why there is just one me.
And a billion unique youths.
We all have different looks and love.
Likes and dislikes too.
But there's a Coke for we.
And us.
And there's a Coke for you.
So simple, so effective, so inclusive. Did it seem like they were breaking, any real backs to do that? Was it impossible? Did it seem like a really insurmountable achievement? Not really. I mean, there's lots of great examples that we can learn from and take into our infant feeding culture. When you take this into consideration, it's easy to see how the 5.9 million Facebook views of the breastfeeding advert were just a missed opportunity. How many people could we have influenced if we just had something that looked like the UK, that reflected the communities that we see every single day. Now, I'm pleased to say that some people have learnt from the mistakes made by the advert, and you've probably seen that the Association of Breastfeeding Mothers recently released their hashtag #FeedOn campaign, and they did a wonderful documentary. If you haven't seen it, please go and watch it, because it includes a whole range of families and communities, and it's very real, very raw. It's not pressed shirt and perfect makeup and hair. It's just real people talking about feeding their babies, and that's what we need more of. But, you know, being inclusive isn't always easy, and I suspect that that could be one of the things that holds us back. But it's not an excuse not to try at all. You know, you have to be brave, you have to feel that fear and do it anyway, like the book says. Some examples. Did you know EastEnders in 2009 featured its first all-black episode? It followed the journey of Patrick Truman, and there was not one single white actor in that episode. It was the first time in the 24-year history of EastEnders that they had an all-black episode. And you know, 239 people complained just because of that. The Ghostbusters film, amazing. The Ghostbusters film received huge backlash for daring to cast an all-female lead. And you probably know that Doctor Who, when they announced it, it was going to be a woman, oh gosh, Twitter just exploded with furious tweets about, you've ruined our lives. Black Panther, it was too black. Clues in the title. So after speaking with many organisations and people about diversifying their materials, the answer I've had is always the same. We can't access the images. We haven't got these images. We can't get these images. They just don't exist. Again, I'm pretty sure I'm here. So diversity in infant feeding was born. I said, okay, it's not there. I'm going to go and get it. I'm going to go and do something about it. And I'm going to probably not sleep very much because I'm so busy sorting this out in between everything else and the 4 kids and all that stuff. But what I've created with the help of a few friends is an online platform. So at the moment we're not quite live, but we are developing an image bank that's to be accessed by organisations, individuals and small businesses. It's a very thorough vetting process, so don't worry, you're not going to see our images on formula adverts. It's not for profit, so we rely entirely on donations or money generated from the bank. And how it works is people, the NHS, trusts, doulas can come to the image bank, select images and purchase images to use in their materials. And the idea is that it'll be something that is affordable, so no one can say, it's too expensive. I mean, how much are Black lives worth? How much are people with, who need walking aids? How much are babies with chronic health conditions, premature babies? How much? What's the price for them? Luckily, we're quite cheap. And we collaborate with passionate photographers who are willing to work for free or very cheap because we haven't got much money. And we go around and we're capturing images. People can also donate their images remotely using a simple upload and image release form, and off it goes into the bank. And what we're actually hoping is eventually to have a real platform that's got a diverse range of resources that are evidence-based, robust, reflective of the real community, and translated exactly the same into other languages. We're not going to omit any evidence. We're not going to omit any information because everybody deserves that information. Here are some of our images. Real people, real babies. Lovely laid-back twins there. Love that one. So, what we've seen, even though our website isn't live yet, is we've already seen the impact of reflective representation. And when we shared this image of a mother in a wheelchair feeding her babies, this is one of the comments that we had. I often question if I could cope having children as I rely on my wheelchair, and this confirms to me that I most definitely could do it. If one image on a Facebook page that's not got many followers, so please go and like us, can have that sort of impact on someone who hasn't even had a baby yet, someone who's not pregnant, what impact do you think diverse images could have on women, parents, families in the antenatal period, people in the early postnatal period? If we show more images, just think of what effect we could have. And it's so simple. I'm not asking you to stand on your head. I'm not asking for £1 million. That would be nice, though. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable. All you need to do, well, there's a lot you can do. You could diversify your own website and your leaflets. You can write or email to organisations suggesting that they diversify. Please do. It's people don't realise. So whatever it is, it could be something as simple as supporting the Facebook page, sharing our posts, liking our images, supporting other organisations that are pushing and striving for inclusivity. If you run a support group, sit down, think about how accessible is this? What can we change? What can we do? One thing you must not do is expect the communities you're trying to reach to do the work for you. We're quite often happy to say what's the issue here, but actually we have enough challenges. Imagine if you are there and you're in a wheelchair, you don't want to think about how to make the breastfeeding group more accessible for you. Someone else should already think about that, especially if it's an NHS run. Come on. Recognise your own biases, recognise the lens that you're seeing the world through. Feedback, suggestions to your local MVP, elevate minority groups, provide platforms, opportunities for them to raise their voices, share their experiences. Listen, please listen. You know what, I know in breastfeeding support you're really good at listening, but what I'd probably suggest is maybe we're listening to the wrong people. These are the crucial questions that I want people to really ask. Whose voice is heard? And how is it heard? Who isn't in the room? Who's not in this room? Who is trying to get into the room? Like I said, the Baby Friendly Conference, £190. I did go the year after the breastfeeding advert, and I had to put it on a credit card. Because, I felt it was important to go, but this is the realities. And I'm privileged enough to be able to do that. There's many people who wouldn't have that privilege. So even for me, standing here today, it's difficult for me to access many of the things that are going on. So who is trying to get into the room but can't, and what can we do about it? Whose presence is under threat of being erased? One thing that I did, I was invited to speak at a conference, and they asked me, they said, did I want a hotel because it was quite a distance away, and I said no. I said, look, I'd be fine coming up, doing it and going home again the same day, but please, could they put the cost of the hotel into a ticket or a couple of tickets and pay for people who couldn't afford to go to actually attend? Sadly, I didn't end up speaking at that conference because after they discovered what I'd said about the breastfeeding advert, they wanted to censor my talk. Yep, this is really happening. The silencing is continuing. So these are things that you can do. These are questions you can ask. Some of it is really simple, and what I want everyone to do is to start. With the conversations we've been having for a long time, but what I want everyone to do is start thinking about what you can do, where we can go. Oh. Thanks. Yeah, if has anyone got any questions? Quite happy to answer any questions you might have. Mars?
Have you seen the new breastfeeding book that's coming out in 2020 with 10 contributors, one of whom is an Asian GP, and that is the representation within the 2020 breastfeeding book?
Mars?
And if so, have you made any comments?
Thank you. So Mars is asking about if I've seen a breastfeeding book that's releasing next year. Yep. And only has one minority group, so it's an Asian GP, is that right? Asian GP. Yep. No, I haven't, but I'm going to go and look for it now, and I'm going to go stick my nose in there. But it doesn't surprise me, unfortunately, because this is a common theme. I suspect an element of that is tokenism, but also we have to remember that it's really difficult for people from underrepresented groups, minority groups, to actually get to a position where they are afforded the opportunity to contribute to a book or speak at a conference or write an article. How many academics do we have who are outside the core demographic? It really is difficult, and I know it's 2019, 2020, but an organisation that I offer work for didn't have an equality, diversity and inclusion policy until 2017. Yep. Don't care about me. It's okay. In fact, a lot of breastfeeding organisations didn't until very recently, when I started saying, hello, who are you made up of? They didn't even collect data on what the makeup of their organisation was, because no one cared. Yes?
What sorts of suggestions do you have for improving diversity in a support group situation?
So, suggestions for improving diversity in a support group. Well, I think part of that depends on where you are. You need to look at what's the location, how accessible is it, where are you advertising it, who's telling people about it. Yes, it's important to get health professionals on board, but we also need to recognise that actually it's not unheard of for them not to mention to certain people because there's assumptions. Oh, they just get on with it. They don't need support, they just get on with it. So it really is about going back and sitting down and really opening things up and asking those questions and trying to figure out. And if you change something, it doesn't work, it's okay. Change it again. Keep going. Don't just give up. Don't say, we put a poster up in Asda and they're still not coming. Keep going. Keep going. Engage with those communities. Go out. You go out and say, what can we do? What will make you feel safe? Look at being culturally competent. So we don't get people saying your hair's fascinating. And we don't get people saying, how fast does your wheelchair go? They're here for breastfeeding support. Well, it's true. And these are questions. Yeah, you might be well meant, but it doesn't feel well meant. Any other questions?
Do you just want to share if anybody wants to participate today?
Yeah, so today we are capturing images of real people feeding their babies. So if you'd like to contribute to the project, We have a photographer here for a little while longer. We do have image release forms because the project isn't just about colour, it's also about real people, you know, plus size women, people who are not like they're in an M&S advert. We want people with hair that looks like a toddler's been pulling at it, and people with, you know, a bit of sick on the shoulder, and because these are the realities of being a parent, you know, that's what we're after. We're hoping actually to branch out eventually and cover all of maternity and sort of the perinatal period too. And we're thrilled to be working with NHS England and Public Health England on finally tackling some of those issues within the literature. So if you're interested in being involved, if you want to find out more, we've got a stand downstairs and we've got a photographer if you're willing to be captured as well. Thank you.